Yeah, we're off. Hi, guys.
We're finding fossils.
Hey, Diane. Good to see you.
Hello, my name is Brad Olson. I went down to Antarctica on a sailboat in 2019, and I'm here to tell you about some of the things I found down there and some of the great mysteries that I went to try to investigate, see if there was any validity to some of the claims of large motherships under the ice, pyramids poking through the ice, or antediluvian civilization. Also, the mystery of the black goo, which is this backstory was the Falkland Wars was fought over the black goo. So we'll get into all that one by one. And thanks for being here on Super Soldier Talk. When I was researching my trip down to Antarctica, being a cartographer, map maker myself for some of the books that I write, I was poring over maps of Antarctica, both modern, charting out my voyage, and also ancient maps. And some of these ancient maps are very curious because they were drawn during the age of exploration. And on those maps, the continent of Antarctica is depicted. Now, what's so interesting about that is the continent of Antarctica was not discovered until 1821 when the first whalers and sealers who had read the account of Captain...
I never knew that. It wasn't discovered till 1821. I never knew that.
Cook sailing around the continent, but never discovering it. But he wrote in his account of the Southern Ocean that it was rich in seal and whale life. And back then, oil blubber was the main component to be used with the oil lamps that were prevalent in 19th century Europe. So a lot of merchant marines headed down to the Southern Ocean as fortune seekers to just harvest seals for their hides and whales for their blubber. And that's how the continent of Antarctica was discovered in this modern age. I would propose that humans have been down there and discovered it before then, but we'll just use this historical perspective.
Actually, I'll get rid of the captions. They're a bit annoying.
Set foot in 1821. However, you have the Piri Reis map of 1519, the Bache map, the Mercator map, which included the projection of a 3D planet for the first time on a two-dimensional map, all depicting Antarctica. And the Bache map is really interesting because it depicts Antarctica as two separate continents. And it wasn't until the whole continent was scanned and understood that indeed there is a channel between Western and Eastern Antarctica, suggesting that perhaps this Bache map had information of what Antarctica looked like before it was covered in ice. Similarly, the Piri Reis map, which was only 2 decades after Columbus came to the New World, showing the entire South America outline, as well as Antarctica with some islands that are still as yet discovered. So when I went down there, we had the opportunity to go to a bunch of research stations, including the Palmer base. And when we were in the American Palmer station getting a tour, the head of the station, the chief, said, take a picture of that picture of an ice sheet. He said, that's right out in the bay there in the 1980s. It was painted. And at that time, it was just one big ice shelf. So I took a picture of it. And then later when we got outside, he said, that's what it looks like today. And you could see an island with a big ice cap on it, but it was not visible in that painting from the 1980s. He said that just a few years earlier on Pi Day, which is in mid-March, the land bridge, the ice bridge connecting to the mainland had collapsed. And so for the very first time, they had discovered a new island down by the Palmer base, suggesting that there are still land masses that are trapped under the ice that are still as of yet discovered. So that was quite fascinating that we're still finding new land masses under the ice. And there are changes in the climate. I know a lot of people, myself included, think that there's an agenda behind climate change to get us all on carbon credit scores and to blame us for the changing weather. But something also is very interesting happening down in Antarctica. And one of the maps that I use in my presentation called The Hidden Anomalies of Antarctica was this map from NASA, which showed the continent where it was heating up, but also where it was cooling down. And this is really amazing because Mother Nature, in her infinite wisdom, is able to balance out the heating and the cooling. So that's why we don't have catastrophic flooding in our coastal communities.
Wow.
Because if Antarctica ice map were ever to melt, it would just be absolutely catastrophic for these coastal communities around the world.
Okay, this is only 1 month old.
Of course, water seeks its own level. So if the Antarctica ice cap were to melt and slide off the continent, it would kind of be like having a cup of water and then filled up to the top and then putting ice into it. Of course, it would overflow. That would be the same thing. And on planet Earth, we essentially live on a water planet. And that is 71% of the surface area of the planet is covered with water. And of course, all the oceans interconnect at one point or another. So if one ocean were to rise, they would all rise. And that's why we haven't seen Miami Beach go underwater, nor anywhere else in a catastrophic way, because it just hasn't happened as predicted. So hopefully it never will, but the bellwether is to keep an eye on Antarctica, make sure that those ice caps don't melt and slide off. One of my colleagues on Antarctica research is Linda Moulton Howe. She started her career investigating cattle mutilations and has a very good reputation of interviewing whistleblowers who come to her and want to release their information through her platform called Earth Files. And Linda has gotten into whistleblowers coming back from Antarctica. The first, who I think is also the best, that she interviewed about 7-8 years ago is a gentleman named Brian S. He remains anonymous, hasn't shown his face in the interview, but he did show some photos of him during his operations. He was flying the big cargo planes all across Antarctica, mostly from McMurdo to the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. And he had some stories to share with Linda about his years flying down there, including seeing silver discs over the Beardmore Glacier, which is in the Trans-Antarctic Mountain Range, and also having an emergency rescue of several scientists who were camping on the Rockefeller Plateau, funny name for all the locations down there, who were doing some research. And I can tell you from my experience, it can be extraordinarily cold and dangerous to be away from your camp more than a few hours. And certainly sleeping overnight on the ice can be absolutely deadly. So there were these scientists that went missing on the Rockefeller Plateau. Of course, they communicate with radio, and this whole group of a dozen or so scientists just dropped off the radar. So Brian S. and his team went out looking for them, found the camp, no sign of anybody, and had to fly back to McMurdo and just say we couldn't find them. Suddenly, about a week later, they get a crackling message over the radio that we're here and we need a pickup immediately. And of course, they went out there and got them, and they were ashen faced and wouldn't say a single thing. Hey, where were you guys? We're looking for you. You know, it's dangerous to go missing. Missing on the polar plateau, where presumably where the heck are you going to go? So without saying as much, it's presumed that they found some kind of entrance, perhaps into this inner world, this inner earth, or some kind of under ice base. And what they saw was absolutely terrifying, because not only would they not tell Brian S. and the crew where they were, but they went back to McMurdo. They were debriefed. They would not talk. They had to go back to New Zealand, and they were treated as if they had been exposed to something dangerous. So they had to go through several different protocols.
Wow, that's interesting.
Making sure they weren't carrying some kind of deadly virus with them. So that was kind of peculiar, Brian S. thought. And then his big bombshell with Linda Moulton Howe was when they were tasked to go to the Australian Davis base from McMurdo, and they were ordered to fly around the big no-fly zone, which is just 1 degree off of South Pole. But because it was a life-death situation, they defied the orders and went directly towards the Davis base, saving themselves 20 minutes of fly time. And when they were flying over the no-fly zone, that's when they saw this giant, gaping, multi-mile across hole in the ice. Now, up on the polar plateau where the South Pole Station is located, it's over 2 miles up. So it's very high elevation. Antarctica is the highest elevation continent in the world because of this polar plateau. So a big, giant, gaping hole in the ice certainly caught their attention. And the one thing that I found was most peculiar about this description of the hole is that it also had a road going down into it, like a cat track road that they could drive a snowcat out of the McMurdo or the South Pole Station and go down into it. And so they went and did the emergency rescue at Davis Station. They were taking the person back to South Pole, and then they were going to go on to McMurdo, and they were going to fly over the hole and take another look at it again. And they were given very stern orders. Do not fly over that again. Do your course around the no-fly zone. And indeed, when they did get back to McMurdo, everyone in the crew was called into superior office. They were reprimanded. And just like a lot of people in the military who have had paranormal or UFO experiences, they were told, you didn't see what you just saw, and you're not allowed to talk about it. However, Brian S. never signed a non-disclosure. So years later, he felt it being necessary to get his story out there, and that's what he did. The other whistleblowers Linda Moulton Howe has had on the show is 2 gentlemen in special forces. They too preferred to be anonymous. They go by the name of Spartan 1 and Spartan 2. And they were up on the Beardmore Glacier. Seems to be a paranormal hotspot in Antarctica, where Brian S. saw silver discs flying over, but also where Spartan 1 and 2 said they encountered a large black basalt-like craft wedged in the ice somewhere, and they had a way to enter the craft, and it was mysteriously illuminated on the inside, and it was responsive to their touch, so they could touch a door and it would swing wide open. There
Wow.
were strange hieroglyphs on the wall that they couldn't identify as being Egyptian or anything else, and they were able to walk around this craft, for lack of a better term, and explore around. So I believe that this would have been one of the 3 large mothership-like craft that are said to be in the ice in Antarctica. And our intelligence agencies have known about them since the 1970s, and actually gave them the nickname Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, which were the names of the 3 ships that Columbus sailed over on his original journey. I've been able to identify another one of those locations, and it happens to be in the New Schwabenland area of Antarctica that was claimed by the Nazis just before the start of World War II. And out in the field, up on the polar plateau, there's a base called the Conan Base. And I was really amazed when the GPS coordinates for this seasonal base, meaning they're only there for a couple months every summer, lined up with this Google Earth imagery of some kind of excavation under the ice of this Conan base. And this, I think, is the best evidence for one of those 3 motherships being under the ice. And I really love it when you can get different data points confirming the same story. And indeed, that is the case with the Conan base, because the Farsight Institute remote viewers use those GPS coordinates to locate this craft under the ice that had been excavated in 2013. And indeed, what they found was some kind of manufactured craft that also was built for a very large, tall species. They feel that the Farsight Institute, when they remote viewed it, that it was not only a craft that has not been used in many years, but also had been built for some kind of non-human entity, a very tall alien species that were not present anymore, but the craft was still there. Another great mystery of Antarctica is what the landmass was like before it was covered in ice. And many explorers, even starting with the Scott Party to go to the South Pole, were finding fossils up above the Beardmore Glacier at a location
G'day,
called
Vars. Good to see you, mate.
And the Scott Party of 5 members, they were just 35 days behind Raoul Amundsen to get there in the year 1911. And they were so despondent to find the Norwegian flag flying at the South Pole that these expeditions are planned out years in advance. And on the way back, they were collecting these fossil samples from Mount Buckley that they were going to take back to the Academy in the United Kingdom. And part of the reason that the Scott Party failed on the way back, and all 5 of them, all 5, including Captain Scott himself, perished on the Ross ice shelf, and their bodies remain to this day. They were just buried in the ice where they passed when a rescue party came and found them. And the samples that they took show Antarctica was once a tropical continent, not only with ferns and flora suggesting a jungle-like atmosphere, but also replete with dinosaurs that once existed in Antarctica. Some species of dinosaurs unique completely to Antarctica, meaning they're only found in the fossil records of Antarctica.
And that's not hard to believe, because we've seen that photo from the 1890s of the miners with a pterodactyl. They shot down a pterodactyl. So we know that dinosaurs can live into our age. So that's not so far-fetched.
showing that it had been once part of the giant landmass of Pangea,
I didn't notice, Di.
and had broke off, because there are some parallels in the fossil record with Australia, with India, with Africa, that all those continents were once connected because the same animals were found in the fossil records there. So that's quite fascinating that Antarctica had once been a steamy jungle, where now it's actually just a frozen landmass covered. 99% of the landmass is covered in ice. Antarctica is also the most volcanically active continent in the world, with 91 known active volcanoes. So with all that geothermal activity, you have the propensity for large under ice domes to exist with fairly temperate climates. You could live down there,
Yeah.
in fact, where on the surface it's very difficult to live. And that's why no human.
I don't know why, Diane, but that made the news here in Australia that Trudeau's splitting up with his wife.
Ever lived in Antarctica, just because it would be so hard. And if you were under
He's probably secretly homo, and now he can indulge.
the ice, you would either have to have some kind of hydroponic method of growing your own food or having it shipped in. So only in this modern age could that be possible. Yet it's also possible that you could have an extraterrestrial race down there, or these pre-Adamite, as they're known, species of human-like, not quite human. They were actually giants that perhaps came from Mars or other planets. And by coming here, they were in one of those 3 mothership craft that got stuck in Antarctica and actually had to live out their lives, and perhaps finally perished in Antarctica, or perhaps survived. And this is why there's so much secrecy with the continent, with these no-fly zones, with this hole in the ice.
Vast, I don't know about him being a girl, but I do know he's Castro's son, or Castro's offspring, according to you, because he looks like Castro.
With the NSA, which was created in the 1940s, but wasn't even admitted to until the 1980s, and that's where it got the acronym No Such Agency for the National Security Agency, and they are tasked with all things extraterrestrial. So they're the ones at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, protecting the no-fly zone, making sure nobody can go out there, calling back the planes. For
yeah, example. I do too, Diane. And if you look at him, you can see he looks like Castro.
Such as
and then you put in the conspiracy behind it, it's quite believable.
The NSA is Johnny on the spot.
And he's a really bad socialist. He's a full-on socialist. He's destroying Canada now.
Comes to a down craft, they're the first ones there to cordon off the area, create a cover story if necessary, and to extract all the parts, personnel, bodies, and different craft to take back to some of our laboratories for backward engineering. So the NSA has a building in McMurdo Station, which is the largest research station in Antarctica run by the Americans. And there's an unmarked building in McMurdo that's run by the NSA. What's going on in there? Presumably, it's a big warehouse type building that when they do accumulate craft or bodies, what have you, to take back to America, that first they have to go through McMurdo, and they can be stored in Antarctica before they can get them on one of those big cargo planes to fly back. So there's stories of these pre-Adamite giants living in Antarctica, and some of them have been found as bodies, but some of them are said to be awakening, coming out of a sleep-like state, stasis, and now ready to emerge back onto the planet. So this is an interesting ongoing story about how these giants are now awakening down in Antarctica and what they're going to do when they're fully awakened back. Our planet has these plates that are very fluid, as Brooks Agnew described them as cornflakes on top of a bowl of milk, that when the poles move, and indeed there is evidence that right now the magnetic South Pole and the magnetic North Pole are on the move like they've never been before. In fact, the magnetic South Pole is now off the continent and moving towards Australia. And so this was an indication where the poles would shift in a 45-degree movement, which is very sudden. It only takes a couple of days, but of course would be absolutely catastrophic to all the life on the planet, because it would create tremendous earthquakes, the rising and falling of continents, volcanoes blowing off, tidal waves all over the planet, that it would reset the polar landscapes to be more over North America. So Canada would be the new North Pole, extending all the way down into the Pacific Northwest. Similarly, Australia would be the new southern South Pole. Then that would leave Antarctica in more of a temperate climate, and the ice would rapidly melt. We would finally be able to see what's really under the ice and could expose antediluvian civilization. There are some reports that there are excavations down there where they're finding not only some of these pre-Adamite giants, but they're located in megalithic structures,
Wow.
as well as finding
11 children, Diane. He's a rabbit.
fauna, that is woolly mammoths.
Hey, Phil, good to see you, mate.
Ice Age mammals that also once.
Oh, you're in Florida. Good on you, buddy.
And maybe still does, because in the secret diary of Admiral Byrd, where he said he flew into the hole in the ice, which he just
I got Admiral Byrd's testimony up after this, guys.
discovered 18 years earlier as the first aviator to fly over the South Pole. Admiral Byrd, after the tragic loss during the Battle of High Jump in Operation High Jump, was summoned to fly with just his radio man to the South Pole. And knowing that this gaping hole was there, large enough to accommodate his flying into the hole and then back out, was summoned into the inner earth, where while he was flying, the first thing they noticed was verdant green valleys and flowing creeks, saying to his radio man, this shouldn't exist. And then seeing something like an elephant, as they got closer, they did another double take, and indeed it was a woolly mammoth down there. And then while Admiral Byrd was still flying to Flugelrads, or the UFOs of the Germans, came wingtip to wingtip, and he lost control of his plane. This is what he wrote about in his diary. And they took him down to this emerald-like city. I always use the example of the Wizard of Oz, of some fantastic-looking crystal city under the ice, where Admiral Byrd was summoned to visit the master. And he noticed when his plane was taken down by remote control, out of his control, that the two UFO saucer crate ships had Nazi insignia on them. And when he got out of the ship, his plane, to go meet the master, that he noticed that the two pilots had German accents and were also had insignia on their uniform, suggesting it was a variation of the Third Reich, probably the Fourth Reich. And this could be the New Berlin base that was prophesized in the early 1940s by Admiral Golan, saying that he had created an impregnable fortress for the Fuhrer in a great area of frozen land, suggesting that this was Antarctica. But they wouldn't have been able to build this crystal city in just a few years when Operation High Jump and Admiral Byrd was summoned to meet the master, who he said was of an otherworldly nature, could communicate with him telepathically, but they were able to speak in English. And the master was very concerned with the United States having just developed nuclear bomb technology at the Trinity site in White Sands, New Mexico, and then dropping bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan to end World War II. The master said, "We know that you're a very high-ranking and esteemed admiral in the U.S. government. We would like you to go back and warn your governments not to use nuclear weapons, that this has a ripple effect through the dimensional states that would affect them and other ET races." And of course, Admiral Byrd said he would. And when he was leaving Antarctica after Operation High Jump, he mentioned to one of the reporters who came on his ship when they were resupplying in Chile, and he said, and it was reported in the El Mercurio newspaper, that Admiral Byrd warned that we would be confronted with an enemy that would be able to fly pole to pole at incredible speeds, saying this in 1947 with a kind of technology that we still don't have disclosed to the world today that could fly in one shot from pole to pole at incredible speeds. And when Admiral Byrd did get back to the Pentagon, he was not treated as a hero. He too went into quarantine and was reprimanded for making that statement, but also debriefed for many weeks before they finally let him go home to his family after Operation High Jump, finding everything they could about this inner Earth civilization, what kind of technology they had, and coming to the stark realization that the Germans had not lost World War II. In fact, the Third Reich, the political arm of Nazi Germany, never surrendered, nor did the SS, which was a secret society within and using the best of the best. It's estimated that up to 250,000 officers and SS personnel escaped Germany at the end of the war, using their large U-boat fleet to go down to their base 211 and their new Berlin base, where they were able to continue working on their backward engineered flying craft, which then was seen by Admiral Byrd on his expedition down there. So just more incredible testimony from a very high-ranking and decorated admiral.
Diane, we've got the Women's World Cup happening now in Australia. We actually hosted FIFA's women soccer competition. So, yeah.
Someone who knew Antarctica better than...
I wonder if she died in the... I wonder if she had the heart attack in the FIFA World Champs.
Any living human being on the planet to write in his diary that he went into this inner Earth environment where there was some kind of heat source and ultraviolet rays that could grow plant and tree life underneath the polar plateau with flowing rivers in a temperate climate where woolly mammoths live. If it was anybody except for Admiral Byrd who was saying these things, probably nobody would take him too seriously, but his son was given the diary upon Admiral Byrd's death with instruction that Admiral Byrd would like to have this story told, and the son then published the secret diary of Admiral Byrd. So after World War II, the British had been spying on the Nazis down in Antarctica, called Operation Tamerlane. And I actually went to visit Port Lockroy, which was one of the spying stations, including another one down by the Vernansky base, which they donated to the Ukrainians, was originally a British spying station. And they were tasked with trying to intercept radio messages and spying on the New Schwabenland claim of Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, where they were detecting U-boat traffic continuing to bring down personnel and material. So after the war ended, there was a great exodus of the German U-boats. In fact, many of them still to this day have never been accounted for. They know that they were built and they had their code numbers on them, but have never resurfaced. So in a book by Henry Stevens called The Black Sun, he describes the final battle of World War II was actually out in the North Atlantic, and it was a resounding defeat of the Allied forces, because this was the Fuhrer's convoy. This was taking the most important personnel and equipment out of Nazi Germany at the very tail end of the war, including Adolf Hitler himself. The History Channel did a very
Wow, I never knew that
series called Hunting Hitler.
Hey, Shawnee, good to see you.
And 35 episodes or so, going to these locations in South America, some of which I went to visit, but also touching on Antarctica as this refuge of the New Berlin base. So the Americans were tipped off by the British that the Nazis, some of the highest personnel, had escaped, and they were tasked with mounting an operation. It wasn't just the Americans, but other allied countries all came together in Operation High Jump, 1946, 1947, supposedly as a scientific research mission, yet it was going down there as a military flotilla, replete with aircraft carriers, submarines, 33 aircraft, 4,600 trained military troops that appeared were ready for some kind of military engagement and landing on the continent to confront these Antarctica Nazis. And when they had all convened right around New Schwabenland offshore with this flotilla, head by Admiral Byrd himself, in a ship called the USS Mount Olympus, they were all there, and they had located some outbuildings in New Schwabenland at the base 211. They had done a little pitter-pat of bombing the day before, but then the day of the Battle of High Jump, Admiral Byrd had ordered his bombers to go out there and really carpet bomb the area. When those ships were approaching base 211, all of them just went bloop right off the screen. Those planes and those pilots and personnel have never been seen or heard from ever again. So that bombing sortie did not succeed. Great loss of life and those planes, but also on the same day, out where the armada of ships was, up out of the ocean came these flying craft, these UFO flying disc craft, to confront the armada of ships. And while they could have easily taken out the entire armada, they didn't. They just took out one ship called the USS Murdoch, and what could be described as a directed energy weapon or a very high powerful laser beam just sliced the ship in half, with, of course, great loss of life, because even if you jumped overboard in time before the ship sank very rapidly, you would die of hypothermia very quickly. The anti-aircraft weapons against these flying UFOs couldn't touch them. There was some kind of force field around these craft, and in a show of force, again, for Admiral Byrd to take back to his superiors at the Pentagon, don't mess with the Antarctica Nazi station because we have technology beyond your wildest dreams. And in fact, they did. So the last two battles of World War II were actually won by the Nazis, who then reformulated themselves as the Fourth Reich. And while the German fighting forces of the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe and the Navy did surrender on VE Day, the Fourth Reich became more of an intelligence and high-tech new form of government. And in Henry Stevens' book, and also Joseph Farrell has done quite a bit of research on the Fourth Reich, called Nazi International, was his book. He was saying that this third force was fanning the flames of discontent between the Soviet bloc and the NATO bloc. And this is why we had the Cold War, because they were still operating behind the scenes and keeping those two superpowers at each other's throat. Where all the while it was this intelligence force, this third force of the reformulated Nazis. And of course, James Rink has a lot of great information about the German secret space program, the Nachtwaffen, which is also the Dark Fleet, allied with the reptilian forces operating out of Antarctica. In fact, it said that the base 211 was an old reptilian base that was just donated to the Nazis to use for their own purposes, which they did. So that's very interesting that you have reptilian, malevolent ET connection also going hand in hand. And who knows, it could have been reptilian craft that came up out of the water that confronted Admiral Byrd. Well, of course, the Americans didn't take that too well, losing 2 battles at the end of World War II. And of course, they were very keen on confronting those Nazis once again. But before they could, there was the famous flyover of Washington, D.C., of several craft, and it was on the newspaper cover around the country in 1952 of these crafts flying over the Capitol building, penetrating the most secretive and protective airspace in the world. And here you have a dozen or so craft flying right over the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. For a long time, everybody assumed that they were UFOs of an extraterrestrial nature. Most UFO researchers would agree those were the Antarctic Nazis flying pole to pole at incredible speeds to confront the United States and basically force surrender treaties. And this is now, according to new information from Laura Eisenhower, who's a great granddaughter of Dwight D. Eisenhower, that it was actually Truman who signed these surrender papers, and that Dwight D. Eisenhower just inherited a very bad deal. He was very upset with the military-industrial complex, as we know in his farewell speech, but he also threatened to take the First Army into Area 51 when he was denied access to that super secret compound in Nevada on the Nellis Air Force Base. That never happened. They worked out some kind of arrangement. But you can see at that point, things had started to go out of control. And these Fourth Reich Nazis had gained quite a bit of power and control within our American government. Of course, we know about Project Paperclip, where we're taking their scientists right out of Nazi Germany and putting them in high-ranking positions. And this is part of the neo-fascism problem that we have in this country today. And I would say it all traces back to this Fourth Reich third force that has been a player ever since the end of World War II. Operation High Jump ended 2 months into the 6-month campaign. That's always been a question about why Admiral Byrd ordered a retreat. Well, they were resoundingly defeated in the Battle of High Jump is one reason, but also because they knew that they had to come back with higher technology to finally confront the Nazis. Then you had, in the following years, another expedition in which Admiral Byrd went down there called Operation Deep Freeze. And this was not so much of a confrontation with two militaries, but more to try to root out some of the Nazi bases and get more intelligence on it. And in fact, the flyover of Washington, D.C. then happened in subsequent years, forcing this treaty on Truman, which was then adapted by the Eisenhower administration, much to his chagrin that he had to go along with it. Then there was the nuclear bomb testing, ostensibly to blow a hole in the upper atmosphere and test nuclear weapons down in the Southern Ocean, right in the area of New Schwabenland. And this was called Operation Argus. And Operation Argus was, the cover story was they were doing nuclear bomb testing of the upper atmosphere in this alternative one to allow the pollution to escape. But in fact, they were nuking the Antarctic Nazis in 1958 as retaliation. By that time, most of the staff and personnel had left. They didn't really like it there. They were isolated from any outside viruses, because when you live in a sterile environment like Antarctica, where no viruses or bacteria can exist naturally, every time a supply ship would come or a U-boat with personnel from the outside, if just one person had the remnants of a cold, it would sweep through the whole Antarctica colony, and then everybody would get sick. So they were just kind of getting tired of being down there. So by the time of Operation Argus, they had moved almost all of the personnel and material to their secret bases in Chile and Argentina. And when I was going over the maps of my South America trip, before and after I went to Antarctica, I was discovering that there are huge land holdings in Chile and Argentina that act as micronations. That is, they are their own countries, in so much that they can operate independently, such as the Vatican City within the city of Rome, within the country of Italy, but it's its own micronation. And so the Germans had set this up pre-World War II, had started buying land holdings as well as financing corporations, because the money man, the number two under Hitler at the end of the war, was a man named Martin Bormann. He kept popping up all over South America in the 1950s, where they were building their Fourth Reich empire. And
okay, that's not true. They found Martin Bormann's DNA outside a Berlin train station in 1945. That's not true.
This had been noticed by our intelligence forces, but some of them had started to come over to the side of the Fourth Reich. That's why the CIA was responsible for deposing democratically elected leaders and propping up others, such as Perón in Argentina, terrible fascist president of that country, and then Pinochet in Chile, to depose a democratically elected leader there, putting in a fascist. So it's very interesting.
Diane, how the hell is he in charge of the United States? He can't even get titles right.
That Chile and Argentina are very closely connected for thousands of miles along the spine of the Andes Mountains. And when I was down in San Carlos de Bariloche in Patagonia, there was the Anelco house, where in hunting Hitler, they had found the house and saw that it had stovepipes for an underground base there. They even went ashore, and they found where the seaplane was located. So if the authorities were ever moving in on the Anelco house, they could get Martin Bormann and even Hitler himself onto the seaplane, fly out of the big lake there, and cross the spine of the Andes Mountains and get into Chile and be safe at another safe house. So I do believe Hitler lived out his natural life in South America. It's said that he's buried underneath a hotel in the capital of Paraguay. Can't confirm that, but when I was down there, there was a big news story that somebody's cache of Nazi artifacts, some very valuable and SS artifacts. It was a big news story when I was down there. Just thousands of items was discovered in somebody's private collection. And this could have only been collected with a large amount of personnel to have thousands of items down there. So many Nazi sympathizers in South America. In fact, it wasn't until the very end of the war that Chile and Argentina were pressured to join the Allies. Before then, they were very sympathetic to Nazi Germany. And indeed, I went to several locations, not only around Bariloche, which is just like a town out of southern Bavaria, Germany, but also another town called La Falda near some of the industrial hubs, including Cordoba, where the Nazis had set up several corporations. And now Argentina is kind of a basket case of a country, kind of like the way the Marcos family had stolen all the wealth from the Philippine government. But Argentina had the possibility, had the potential to be a real powerhouse economic force, but the kleptomaniacs in government stole all the resources, and that's not the case with Argentina today.
Wow.
2 years before I went down to Antarctica on a sailboat for 26 days to the Palmer Peninsula and islands off of the Palmer Peninsula, a very curious thing happened with a lot of world leaders and royal family members, and even one of the Apollo 11 astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, were going down to Antarctica for unknown reasons. And they all happen to be in the same season, that is 2016 and 2017. You had King Carlos of Spain, an elderly man, and I can tell you it's not easy to travel down there. It's really difficult, in fact, and the weather and the climate is very harsh. So for these old men like Patriarch Kirill from Russia, also an elderly man, to go down to Antarctica, you kind of have to scratch your head and say, well, what are they really doing down there? And Buzz Aldrin made this cryptic tweet that he has seen the face of evil and that we're all in danger. And then that tweet quickly came down. But nonetheless, Buzz Aldrin had to be medically evacuated. He had some kind of health issue. They had to get him out of there. So maybe he did see the face of evil, and maybe we are all in danger. You also had John Kerry, an acting Secretary of State, the highest ranking U.S. official, to go down to Antarctica on a Thursday in 2016 when Trump beat Hillary Clinton. It's presumed that when John Kerry got to McMurdo, he went missing for several days, that he went to one of these under ice bases to get his marching orders. What are we going to do about this Trump guy, and how should we handle this? That the actual leaders of this interplanetary corporate conglomerate are based out of Antarctica, and John Kerry was going down there to find out what they wanted to do with this new president, Donald Trump, who had taken the office against all odds and certainly set them back quite a bit on their timeline as far as pushing forward this new world order agenda. So it was quite interesting that at that same time, Prince Harry was also going down there with some of his army buddies, but he was going to the South Pole to go cross-country skiing. Well, there's nothing down there on the polar plateau for hundreds of miles, yet they just left the South Pole Station and went in the direction of that no-fly zone, and presumably going to see this giant hole under the ice which got the nickname the Illuminati Disneyland, that perhaps this is where they were going, including John Kerry himself, to go to this inner earth civilization and to see it with their own eyes. But of course, the common folk can't do it. Only elite or royalty would be allowed to get anywhere near there. Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world, with 91 known volcanoes. You have the propensity of the geothermal features to melt large cavities under the ice, where it's presumed other life forms could exist, or that other civilizations could set up their own shop down there and be able to actually even manufacture using geothermal heat for a power source. So the Nazis had seized upon one of those fault lines, and one of the first locations they went to inland was a place called the Schumacher Ponds, named after the pilot Schumacher, who landed one of the seaplanes off the MS Schwabenland ship. And his ground party left for several days, I believe, to go and find that defunct reptilian base that they were going to be allowed to refurbish for their own purposes. But while Schumacher stayed behind with the seaplane, he did several tests in the ponds and found out that the water got warmer as it got deeper. Usually it's the other way around. With the thermocline, the warmer water rises to the top. But in the case of the Schumacher Ponds, it actually got a lot warmer as it went down, and that's why these ponds never freeze. So the Nazis had established their base 211 right on a fault line with this geothermal features, and it's presumed that other bases are down there as well, perhaps much older, and utilizing these geothermal features in different ways that they can survive down there. So that's really interesting that the whole the fault lines along the Transantarctic Mountains have volcanoes. Mount Erebus, right by McMurdo Station, is an active volcano with a lake of lava in the crater. It's only one of two locations. The other is in Africa, along the African Rift, that has active volcano lake inside the crater. So that creates a whole bunch of very interesting geological features around Mount Erebus and elsewhere. Just off of Antarctica are the peri-Antarctic islands, is what they're called, and most of them are volcanic. Some of the southernmost islands are not necessarily active. Some are dormant or extinct volcanoes poking up out of the ground. And there's an island chain called the South Sandwich Islands. The southernmost island is Southern Thule Island. And this was a place with a very remote scientific research station called Corabeta, Uruguay, run by the Argentinians. Now, a lot of people don't realize, and there are many questions about the Falkland Wars in 1982, when Britain was sending a huge armada of ships to go capture these very sparsely populated Falkland Islands and the South Sandwich Islands. And in fact, you can see on Wikipedia that the armada of ships splits into two groups. Very few people know that the Falkland Wars was fought on two fronts. Most people just remember what happened around the capital of Stanley in the Falkland Wars. But in fact, there was a whole other armada of ships that was going to capture these mostly uninhabited islands. In fact, the war ended when surrender papers were signed off the coast of South Thule Island.
Yep.
And when the 8 scientists saw the battleships from the United Kingdom coming to their base, they put up a surrender flag. No shots were fired. And the Falkland War actually ended at southern Thule Island. And so many war historians were thinking, what the heck was that all about?
Wow.
Going down there with great loss of lives, mostly to the Argentinians. It was a very one-sided war. The British sunk a Argentinian battleship called the Belgrano with great loss of life. I was down in Ushuaia before we set sail for Antarctica, and they had something similar to our Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., of all the names of all the very young conscripts that went down with the Belgrano. And the Argentinians are still very upset over the Falkland Wars. Those islands are just offshore of Argentina, and they can't understand why the world community is not up in arms in protest, why they wouldn't allow, they call them Isla Maldiva, that they would not be Argentinian territory, but in fact British territory. And so the second armada of ships that broke off to capture these mostly uninhabited islands was so important it had its own name. It was called Operation Keyhole, which culminated in the surrender of South Thule Island. And what was it that was so important for them to go down there to capture this research station, which, by the way, after they captured it and got the surrendered scientists off.
Diane, are you talking about that doctor yesterday on the link that was telling that girl, yeah, I shouldn't be given the vax? That was quite stunning.
So that they just destroyed the base. But they were there to get something very important. And that was the black goo. And it was deposited there by extraterrestrials a very long time ago by the a benevolent race of ETs. And you think about black goo, it's a sentient, perhaps AI-induced substance that will glom together, and it can be used for rapidly cloning if that's what is necessary. And that's why it was brought here by the extraterrestrial race after the Toba explosion 71,000 years ago. And I actually had the opportunity to go to Lake Toba on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. And it's this great big freshwater caldera lake with an island in the middle that exploded 71,000 years ago and put up all this ash that it created a nuclear winter scenario, and that there were so few humans on the planet, only 30,000 or so humans on the entire planet. This is why we have such similar DNA among all the human species, is because there were just so few of us. And at that time, Earth was very susceptible and vulnerable to an alien invasion because there were just so few humans. However, the surface of Earth has always been, the destiny was the humans would live here. And now we have 8 billion of us. Think about that. In 71,000 years, we went from 35,000 humans to 8 billion. That just shows you how quickly humans can reproduce. But the black goo was brought here and stored on this frozen South Thule Island because in a freezing temperature all year round, it is rendered inert. Therefore, it cannot multiply, it cannot regroup itself. And so the Argentinians were studying the black goo at the Corbetta Uruguay base during the Falkland Wars for several years prior, and doing it in a very respectful and responsible way, keeping it frozen, knowing that if this were ever to get out, it would wreak havoc. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. That the whole Falkland Wars was a cover with the objective of getting the black goo and taking it back to the United Kingdom which they did, and were backward engineering it in the Marconi laboratories in London, England, and it got loose, and it killed dozens of scientists and people within Marconi. There were many cover stories that there were suicides or very strange deaths, but I think the black goo got out and it affected these people, and it is now out in the world today. It has the properties of graphene oxide, which we've come to learn is in the injectables, that has also is very black and goo-like in nature, but has a way of self-replicating and spreading throughout the host if need be. So the Falkland Wars, which was fought over to get this black goo and use in a military or even super soldier application, got out. And James Rink, of course, has many times talked about some of the Naftwaffen having to take the black goo, that it will get inside the body and take over. Most importantly, it'll take over your mind so that you can be controlled by this stuff. And we are living in a very strange time now where this black goo has gotten out. And incidentally, the whole Morgellons syndrome only started a decade after the British got the black goo back to the Marconi laboratories, were attempting to backward engineer it and control it. But being in a warmer climate, it got out of control. So you have the Morgellons syndrome, and you have this hydrogel developed by DARPA, and the graphene oxide, all with very similar properties of what this black goo is. So it's already starting to appear in humans and animals. So we were warned by some of the ET groups that were monitoring what the Argentinians were doing with the black goo on South Thule Island, that if this were ever to get out, it would wreak havoc. And we're seeing it happening today. Underneath the ice of Antarctica is an entire system of lakes and rivers that drain these lakes and flow out the rivers to the ocean. One of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, in the top 10 largest freshwater lakes that nobody's ever heard of, is called Lake Vostok. And that is under the ice, 2.2 miles under the polar plateau. First discovered using satellites because they saw the depression of the ice dome covering the lake. And thought, well, that's out of the ordinary. There must be something under there. And they're probing. The Russians have a base there called the Vostok base, and they were probing under the ice. They finally got a drill to go down 2.2 miles to puncture into this under ice dome, and then also finding that there was this huge freshwater lake, which they named Lake Vostok. When they first got their drill down there in 2016, they had to use kerosene to keep the drill bit from freezing. And the very first water dip that they did was contaminated. So it wasn't until a couple years later that they got a clean sample out of Lake Vostok. And they looked at any kind of microorganisms under the microscope and found that there was a kind of bacteria that comes off of a fish but had never been seen before. So the presumption is there's a whole bunch of different kind of life that lives in Lake Vostok as yet been discovered. Well, Russians, being as Russians are, also wanting to find out if there was anything else down there. There were stories in Nexus magazine and other publications that they sent down a exploratory party, not only to explore the surface area of Lake Vostok and the shoreline, but also replete with scuba diving equipment to go down into the lake. And they had a team scuba diving down in Lake Vostok, and they were confronted with some kind of sea monster. This, according to these news reports in the alternative press, that confronted some of the divers and actually was able to consume or cut those divers off from their oxygen supply with a loss of life. But some of the Russian divers survived, came back up to tell the story, and that news story then leaked to the alternative media. So there may be some kind of creatures in Lake Vostok which are very dangerous and deadly to human exploration in the depths of the lake, which is a very deep lake too, that was carved out from glacial activity before it was covered in ice. So it's a very ancient lake too, but completely cut off from the outside world because it's under this huge plateau of ice in Antarctica. So in the northern and southern hemispheres, there is the phenomenon, we call it the northern lights,
Yep.
or aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere, but the same effect occurs in the southern hemisphere, but they call it the aurora australis. And australis was the name for this land of lore that was supposed to exist in the southern hemisphere when the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who the island Tasmania off of Australia, pretty much charted most of the coast of Australia. That's where they got the name Australis from, where the southern continent of Antarctica was actually presumed by the ancient Greeks that there must be a southern continent to offset the balance of the land masses to the north. And they were absolutely correct. One of the northernmost constellations in the northern hemisphere is called Arctus. So the name Antarctus means the opposite of Arctus, and that's where the name Antarctica comes from.
I did know that.
And so with this phenomenon of the northern and southern lights, you can see these magnificent colors if you happen to be down in Antarctica during their winter, which is a very harsh period of time where it's many months of total darkness. And in fact, during the Antarctica winter, when all of the seasonal bases empty out and just a skeleton crew stays behind with the other bases, there are only 1,000 people living in Antarctica during their winter down there. And so very few people have ever seen the aurora australis, but they would have to be stationed there with the skeleton crew. Turns out that the northern and southern lights, they do occur year round, but you just can't see them in the daytime. And in the summer, they have 4 months at the South Pole of just daylight, no nighttime at all. And just similarly in the wintertime, they also have 4 months of total darkness. So if you are stationed down there, you will see it. One of my colleagues.
And guys, that's how you know the Earth is not flat. How could there be 24 hours sun darkness in Antarctica if it's a flat Earth? It just doesn't make sense.
He's another person I know who has been to Antarctica, Eric Hecker. He says he saw them when he was stationed down there all winter long. Boy, was it cold and very dangerous. You couldn't even go outside.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Smallest bit.
I thought it was the French that sold them Alaska. Okay, then. It's Russians. Fair enough.
Of your skin exposed. So everything had to be covered or you'd get frostbite within minutes. It was that cold. The other very interesting concept is that at one time, Antarctica had been a temperate climate and hosted different civilizations that left behind megalithic monuments, which some reports say have been excavated from out on the ice, but also these pyramids that are poking through. And I know 3 locations where they're located. One of them is not too far from McMurdo in the McMurdo Sound, and Eric Hecker had a long poster, and right there it says pyramid, and there's a pyramid-shaped mountain on it. Another is in Oates Land, just directly south of New Zealand, and the one that we see so much on Ancient Aliens and other TV shows is in the Ellsworth mountain range of western Antarctica. And when I was talking to a group that does trips down there, showing them some of my photos, including those pyramids in the Ellsworth range, and I said, well, what do you think of these? And he dismissed it. He said, well, yeah, I've flown over that a number of times, and we just considered it a nunatak, which just means an attractive, symmetrical mountain poking through the ice. And I said, well, did you ever land a plane there? Did you ever check it out and go see it? No, we never did. Climb it, take a sample. No, we just flew over it. We call it an attack. And then I said, well, I guess the jury's still out until we can get some boots on the ground and check it out. And so that's just another one of the great mysteries of Antarctica. My name is Brad Olson, and that's the name of my website, bradolson.com, and also CCC Publishing, where my books in the esoteric series, which I write a lot about these mysteries I've just discussed today, you can find, including Modern Esoteric.
Okay. Jamie Walden, Interview, World War III and the Great Deception. American Vindicta.
Within the context of that, there's also too a lot of hyperbole, a lot of
Okay, looks like my Wi-Fi dropped out. Okay, back on.
a lot of hyperbole and a lot of sensationalism out there. There's
Yeah, Shawnee, good point. How come everything in the universe is round, yet we're the only place that's got a flat Earth? It just doesn't make sense. And you can't have 24 hours of darkness in Antarctica with a flat Earth, because that's not possible. But the angles of a globe provide the opportunity for a 24-hour darkness in Antarctica.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to American Adventure. We have on with us today Jamie Walden, Pastor Jamie Walden for some of you out there. Jamie Walden and I are going to be talking about World War III and the implications of what's coming out with this whole UFO madness, be it deception, reality. We'll get into that here soon. Jamie, without further ado, man, let's just get straight into it. Thanks for being on today.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me on again. We'll get into it, and there's a couple things that I want to speak to because, the mobilization and the inevitability of World War III are said and done, right? But within the context of that, there's also too a lot of hyperbole and a lot of sensationalism out there. There's a lot of tit for tat, a lot of over sensationalized information coming out. And what it's doing, it's actually playing into the hands of the globalists as far as that power dependent strategy, which came out from those two academic reprobates.
Well, Diane, it's all coming out now. I didn't know that about Russia.
Right, where they basically established this degree of sociological and psychological operations, wherein you so overwhelm a person's senses with metadata, with constant continual small pieces of information that they're never able to connect the bigger dots of the reality of what's going on around them, right? It's almost, for a lack of a better word, it would be like a psychological divide and conquer. And so that's why, a lot of times when you and I talk, or, when I'm doing other interviews, is I always go macro. That's just how my brain's wired. Marine Corps infantry, platoon sergeant, blah, 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 like very logistics minded, is I always think of the big picture, the micro or the macro, so that you understand how all the micro details and that metadata does paint the bigger picture, what's going on. So take, for instance, what we have right now within the last really 48, maybe 72 hours now. I never even know what day of the week it is because we work so hard out here at the base camp. But you have these...
okay, this is 1 month old as well, guys.
Video after video, transparent about the national movements of troop mobilizations within CONUS. CONUS, for those of you who don't know, just means continental United States. So CONUS is within the continental United States. We like to include Alaska with that. Alaska is radically significant for our dialogue today. Hawaii generally isn't considered in CONUS. Guam and all of our other little colonized outward fobs or forward operating bases, for lack of a better word, internationally generally aren't considered in CONUS. But within the last 72 hours, primarily, there's been massive media reports, especially in the alternative media network, of troop movements and troop mobilizations on American streets. Everything from fleets of Osprey, large armadas of aerial combat aircraft and aerial troop dispersion aircraft. Osprey, you and I are familiar with those. Those are primarily used for the United States Marine Corps infantry. Nobody else uses those. Along with, tanks rolling out in Idaho Falls, which, these are the kinds of things that drive me nuts. Let me just do soapbox stuff, right? Hey, let me do soapbox stuff here. There's so many armchair, truthers out there that they have no clue what they're talking about. So I even see video after video, report after report of tanks on the streets in Idaho Falls. Hey off, dude. Get off from behind your computer and actually go do something with your life, because those aren't tanks. Those are self-propelled artillery pieces. And when you manipulate the linguistics on stuff, I can stir anybody's emotion if I manipulate the linguistics. Those are M109 self-propelled artillery that have an effective range of 11 miles. They're part of a National Guard unit that posted a thing over 2 weeks ago for the community that the National Guard would be rolling down the highway because their top speed is only 25 miles an hour, to use caution. Oh, and by the way, they're being escorted by law enforcement. So let's go ahead and debunk that video, truthers. The same thing too. Let me get into this while it's on my mind. The Canada wildfires. Dude, if I see one more person passing around the videos of the Canadian, what would be their equivalent of the Forest Service guy who's spy rigging, dropping fire to create fire, and saying that, see, the government and the globalists are starting all the fires in Canada. I'm like, dude, Again, let me just speak as a fool for a little while, as the Apostle Paul says. Get off your butt and go do something in life. I have done wildland forest firefighting. That is wildland forest firefighting 101. That's called a backburn. That's creating a fire break so that the fire will snuff itself out so that it won't have fuel. Has nothing to do with how everybody sensationalizes all this stuff, dude. The truther movement needs to get away from
Okay, Shorty, see ya.
or whatever their little 15 hour a week jobs are, doing computer programming or drop shipping stuff or whatever. Get off your butts and go do something for real in your life. You might actually have some I don't know, critical thinking skills about the world around you. So okay, let's debunk the starting of the Canadian wildfires. Not to say that there isn't something behind the ignition of the Canadian wildfires, especially from the satellite data, when so many of them started all at one time. But those videos going around of the guys dropping fire from the helicopter has nothing to do with the government starting the wildfires. That is actually guys doing their job to their best of their ability with wildland forest fire management, or whatever the Canadian equivalent is of the U.S. Forest Service up there, doing everything they can to snuff out the fire, right? So, okay, let's take care of that. Now, let me take care of one other bit of hyperbole and sensationalism that's always out there in the truth of the world. This is the fact that Russia has been being grinded, I don't know, whatever the past tense word of that is, to the bone by Ukraine through NATO weapons. Okay, let me give you some insight. My primary MOS, the initial MOS I was trained in, was 0311 Right Infantry, which Doug and I both are Marine Corps infantry. But then I was rolled into being a tow missile gunner, so I was classified as an anti-tank missile man, which then they uptrained us to heavy machine gun operators. So then we were heavy machine gun and we were tow missile man. That's a tube launched, optically tracked, wire command link guided missile system. So we were tank snipers. And then we were cross-trained to be what would be, in the Army, they call them sappers. You know, we were just 0351s, which was demolitions experts and Dragon anti-tank missiles. But then halfway through my career in the Marine Corps, we switched from the Dragon missile to the Javelin missile. Everybody's now familiar with that language because of the war in Ukraine and the capabilities of Javelins. They rolled them out just prior to the war in Iraq in 03 when we did to march up. They're fire and forget, direct fire, top attack, you know, air burst missiles. We can set all kinds of settings on them. They're pretty awesome. So why do I tell you that? I tell you that because one of my primary military occupational specialties within the Marine Corps was a tank sniper. That was what I was specifically honed and trained to do before I got into other areas within the infantry. And as a quote unquote tank sniper, I was required to identify.
Diane, you remember you posted a link once saying that I forgot what I was going to say, sorry.
From 3 miles away on thermals, on night vision, and through our optics on our tow missile, every piece of military hardware. And
that's right, Diane. Didn't you post a link with Biden saying that he sold state secrets? I'm pretty sure you posted a link about him saying that in a meeting.
Both the Allied and the Axis, for lack of a better word, armories. So anything that was anything from the Challengers to the Merkavas to the Leopards to the whatever, right? Any NATO-based armaments, I was required to identify. We had to do little flashcards like elementary school kids every day, silhouettes, like how many wheels on it? Are they deep dish? Is it torsion suspension? Is it this suspension? Like, where is the spotlight on it? How about the snorkel kit on the tank? Like, where is the muzzle brake on the barrel? Every little indicator could tell us what that tank was from very long distances away without seeing the actual markings on it. And primarily what our area of focus was anything Soviet based. We studied and studied and studied, from BMPs to BMDs to tanks to ZSU, 23 TAC-4 anti-aircraft weapons, missiles, platforms, you name it, because as our primary mission set with our missiles on the front line of the battlefield, which we were, as a cap platoon, we were always pushed out in front of everybody to take out any heavy armaments. We had to be able to identify all these. Okay, why am I giving that context? I give that context to tell you unequivocally, Russia is not being ground down by NATO and the US. Russia, I go through all the videos because I'm studying the tactics in Ukraine and Russia because they're coming here, right? That's why I'm studying the tactics, because they're coming here to the US soil and in the very near future. So I'm studying their tactics, their gears, their morale, you know, their capabilities and competencies, how they're doing their combined arms movement, right? Combined arms, which is with air coverage along with heavy armament, and then their use of artillery as moving phase lines.
Yeah, I thought it was you, Dolly.
Right? So the bottom line is that as I'm watching these videos, I'm very well aware of the.
You know, Diane, think about how bad it is. We've got Biden saying he sold state secrets, and he's still in power. He's still running the show. Oh, man. I can't see America coming back from this. And once America falls, the West is going to fall with it. So I can't see America recovering.
Because of my very peculiar background, that Russia has literally brought out all their T-55s, all their T-60s, some T-72s, not even very many of those, all their OG, old school gangster Soviet era IFVs, that's infantry fighting vehicles, and APCs, that's armored personnel carriers, and they have amassed those and thrown those at everything that NATO has to offer, everything that was mothballed and antiquated, and they have dried up every single piece of our advanced technology on their old antiquated 1940s and 1950s era tanks.
You remember Colonel Douglas McGregor? He does, like, he goes on redacted and that. He said the same thing, that Russia, they're just fielding their old equipment, like their stuff from the 80s and 90s. So, and that's just use all the NATO weapons. Wow, Russia's playing chess. The NATO's playing checkers. Wow.
This would be the equivalent of like
oh, good die, please do.
Against a bunch of Patton tanks. You'd be like, dude, what's the point, right? They're just going to obliterate them. However, you just burned up every single round, especially the depleted uranium rounds that those Abrams tanks have, and they have no ability to resupply them. We have burned up thousands of Javelin missiles. Thousands of. You cannot replace the Javelin missiles from Raytheon or from Lockheed or from any of these other guys. You can't just replace a Javelin missile. Oh, and by the way, this connects to the impending World War III. All the chip processors for those missiles from Taiwan. Oh, imagine that. The U.S. just
100% correct, Vas. 100% correct.
Put together plans to evacuate 80,000 citizens from Taiwan as China has mobilized for an amphibious assault on Taiwan. So not only have we depleted all of our missiles in Ukraine against antiquated equipment, this is a major feint maneuver on behest of Russia. We also will never have the ability to replace those missile systems when the big war starts. Okay, next side note. So again, I want to give context because there's so many. I mean, I know they mean well, but dude, the alternative media is just ridiculous. Like they are say nothings and do nothings. They're hyper sensational. They're clickbait oriented dudes. They're not connecting anything to anything. I mean, that's even like listen to like with Tim, you know, dealing with Tim or you and Tim doing interviews about the extraterrestrial, you know, narrative and what's going on with that. Like you guys deal with it empirically, objectively, and rationally, where most people don't. It's hyperbole and sensationalism. Same thing with what's going on with Russia and World War III and even the troop mobilizations in CONUS, right? And so the other key component of this is the fact that up to this point, Russia has not fielded Russians. Is everybody tracking on that? Russia is not involved in the war. Russia is operating through mercenaries, through the Chechens and through the Wagner group and through these other proxy states. By the way, the Chechens are gnarly. Go back and study Kosovo, Serbia, you know, Slovenia, and all this stuff with Milosevic in the early 90s. Like, these dudes are gnarly, cutthroat, bloodlust, Muslim background, Soviet era USSR holdouts that are brutal on the battlefield. They're absolutely brutal on the battlefield. The Marines would have a very gnarly fight coming up against the Chechens because they're animalistic in their nature, right? So the Russians haven't even entered the battle yet. They haven't even entered the battle. And so this death by 1,000 cuts that Russia has imposed against NATO and against the U.S., and the fact that the U.S. is bought and paid for by China to play their role by depleting our strategic oil reserves, deplete all of our national defense reserves and all of our armaments in CONUS, send everything over there, send all my anti-tank missiles over there, send all of our Patriot missile batteries over there, send all these irreplaceable amount of armaments and artillery shells and tank shells and even depleted uranium stuff, send all of our special operators over there, send all of our signets and all of our signals intelligence systems over there, and send them all over there. Is all very strategic for what comes next. And what comes next is beyond what most people's ability to comprehend is going to be. And it is leading to, and I believe soon, a wholesale kinetic attack on European NATO assets, which whenever you hear NATO, it's US, okay? Everybody understand it? NATO is the United States of America. These other guys are so petty. Even the Germanys and the French or the Polish or these other people that you think have robust militaries, they have next to nothing. They couldn't defend their own borders for 48 hours against a Russian attack. Not one of those European countries could. They're basically obsolete at this point, which again is part of the perestroika deception, which we talked about it before. And so the reality of what comes next against the United States of America by Russia and China and Iran and Mexico. Oh, by the way, can't verify this, informed speculation, but there's masses of ejército, right, which is the Mexican military massing on the border with Texas or Southern California with all kinds of U.S. armored vehicles and Hummers and just troop transports that we gave them. And they're massed on the border. For what, right? We have the videos of the cartel members running around with our anti-tank heavy weapons and cruiser weapons on the Texas border. Where did those come from? Well, where'd all the weapons go that were supposed to go to Ukraine, right? So I'm trying to connect the dots for people here, the reality of how big the picture is about what's coming next and how so few people understand the reality of it. I don't know if you saw recently, Doug, I think it was last night, maybe a couple nights ago, that all the electronics in Western Alaska went dead. Does anybody know how far Alaska is from Russia? I'll tell you, 3 miles. Alaska is 3 miles. Parts of the Aleutian Island chain from the Russian border. There are masses of Russian troops in the remote areas of Western Alaska. And then all of a sudden, all the internet, all the cell phone service, everything goes out, right? We have drone cable cutters, which most people don't understand that 98% of all telecoms and all banking are run through undersea cables. Go ahead and look it up and research it. It's pretty fascinating, actually. They actually began running undersea cables for the telegraph in the late 1800s. I had no clue till I dug into this. Like, we've had undersea cable communications to the whole continent of Europe since the late 1800s. That's profound to me, how these engineers think. It's actually pretty cool when you think about it. But most people think that all telecoms is satellite-based and extraterrestrial-based. That doesn't mean alien. Don't send Doug. It means not of Earth, beyond Earth, right? It's not terrestrial, it's extraterrestrial. So most people assume that telecom is extraterrestrial. It's not. It is all terrestrial based. We don't quite have that capability. 98%, in fact, runs through undersea cables. Russian drone cable cutting submarines have been located down at the cables waiting for the go signal to just snip them, for lack of a better word, right? They just cut the cables, cut the comms, all banking. You're talking about global, the great reset happening in real time in a matter of an instant, right? Before kinetic invasion. So I know I'm rambling and fire hosing, but it's because I'm amped up because I can't stand the disconnect that is being fomented by the alternative media, the reality of what's going on.
Hey, Barry,
So
good to see ya.
Hyper sensationalize everything So nobody can even adequately process the information. And what they say is so ridiculous and outlandish and foolish that nobody is adequately preparing. They don't know how to mount a practical, familial-based preparedness type of mindset towards it. And they also don't know how to communicate it. And when they do communicate it, they look like an idiot. So everybody dismisses it anyways, right? So we got to get a handle on the reality of what's going on here with this mobile.
Diane, these companies never learn, do they? Go woke, go broke. Promote LGBT on your product, you'll go broke. Everyone will drop you. So that's what people really think about the LTVG movement. No one likes it except them.
Of U.S. troops in CONUS and how it relates to the greater perspective of the impending kinetic attack on World War III. Let me add this. From what I understand and what, what I've been researching and delving, even reading all the works of Wei Feng and all these different, what would be the DOD heads of China and all these other things, is that all of this has been pre-planned and there has been stand-down orders issued at the gubernatorial level and even on down to city managers. There's been a stand-down order issued from the West Coast, from the Pacific Ocean of the continental United States to the Rocky Mountain Range. That a stand-down order has been issued. So even when you see these troop movements, generally it's my informed speculation that they are routine military exercise-based mobilizations. Most people have never seen, because it usually happens in remote areas, what it looks like for, let's say, Doug, a battalion. When we as a battalion were to go somewhere to train, how much logistics does it take for a singular battalion to move down a U.S. highway to go for a 3-week training event in the mountains or something? Tons, right?
Yeah, I mean, a battalion, at least speaking here from the Marine Corps, that's typically 3 to 4 companies, plus headquarters company. And then you have your logistics, your communications guys. You're going to have your cooks that are going to go with you, motor pool guys that are going to go with you. I mean, we're talking over 1,000 people. That's a big convoy.
Yeah, I mean, even like an infantry battalion itself is about 1,200 Marines. Doug and I only know Marine Corps. I don't have a clue what goes on in any of the other branches, right?
Yeah, they don't matter. We're the best.
Yeah, right. I just know in the Air Force you can use your officer's first name. That's all I know about the Air Force, right? Like, hey, what's up, Jeff? What's up, bro? Sir, bro. But yeah, so even for which a Marine Corps infantry battalion is a small unit in comparison to how the Army rolls out or whatever else, right? And our logistics supply chains are insane, and we have to drive down the highways. I remember always feeling super cool guy when we would go like from 29 Palms down to Pendleton to train, or wherever else, we'd go out to Bridgeport to do mountain warfare training. And we always felt like we were so cool because all the chicks look at you, right, when you're riding in the turret of a Hummer, because nobody's used to seeing military armament on the highways. So when you see a lot of these movements, I can immediately dismiss as basic training exercises. Here's another thing to take into account is the National Guard and the reserves. Now, U.S. Army National Guard and Army Reserves, and then Marine Corps Reserves, these guys only train in the summertime. They have 2-week mobilizations that they have to mobilize, and they do these mega events because they're weekend warriors. And I really appreciate what these guys do. These guys give up a lot of their time and a lot of their normalcy of their reality to be willing to serve in the National Guard or the Reserves. And so a lot of these movements that you see, even by rail is the primary way that we move our equipment because it's so destructive on the equipment, and they're not hardwired for over-the-road movements. They're hardwired for short spurt battle movements across ground, right? But again, a lot of this stuff can be dismissed. Now, I will say this. I will say, and I've said this for years, I do not care that I saw Army Stryker vehicles on the streets of Philadelphia. That doesn't do anything to my spidey senses, right? I don't care that I saw M109 self-propelled artillery pieces, tanks, according to most people, rolling down the shoulder of the road in Idaho Falls. That doesn't do anything. That does nothing.
Hey, Chris, good to see you, mate.
I don't care about seeing infantry guys with weapons. If you pay attention to most of these videos, they don't have magazines in their guns. Doug, you and I know why. We're not allowed to carry magazines and live ammo. Even when we're going on training exercises, there's usually one guy with 5 rounds of defense ammo on a bus when we're moving it. Yeah, like we're not allowed to because of the safety considerations. People don't understand. So pay attention to these videos. Most of these guys don't have magazine in their weapons. They're just standing there for optics or for bodies, or sometimes we even got requested. I remember going down to Palm Springs. They would take Marine Corps infantry guys like us down in Palm Springs to do security for biker rallies or for special events or whatever. Dude, we get used for all kinds of different taskings inside the continental United States. Anyways, I say that to guys with guns or vehicles with guns, armored or not, nothing for my spidey senses inside the continental United States. I will tell you all listeners when to start paying attention. It's when you start seeing mass convoys of logistics vehicles. That's the only time you should go, oh crap. I don't care about fighter jets in the sky. I care about C-130s in the sky and other large aircraft. I don't care about Hummers on the streets or APCs or Buffaloes or Stryker vehicles or LAVs or anything like that. Those things don't matter to me, seeing those on the streets. When you start seeing miles and mile-long things of trucks pulling generators and mechanic fixing equipment like the what I can't even think of their tow trucks, water trucks, fuel trucks, and generators. You will see miles of trucks pulling generators on trailers. That's when you better start paying attention.
And the big
I'm not concerned about the jets. I'm concerned about massive air armada convoys of C-130s and other heavy lift aircraft, because that's when you know things are hitting up. The guys like us, who are the trigger pullers, we are so few. We are so far in between. We are so few and so far between. There's very little actual kinetic fighters within the military. It's all logistics. 24/7 logistics. That's what you need to pay attention to.
Well, then you'll have the big communications trucks, because comms is everything. Comms is everything. Comms is the king of the battlefield. I don't look. It's a lot of this is coming from Hal Turner's website, and not to put a stick in his eye or anything, but I take everything that man posts with a grain of salt. And I know every time he posts something, people freak out over it because there's not too much that you can vet. You can't vet most of the things that a lot of these guys say. And I'm gonna let you explore that on your own imagination, folks. Don't believe everything that you hear, even if it's coming from our own community. We got plenty of guys in this community, in the alternative news community, who think they know everything. They got sources out from everywhere, and black ops and 5-star generals, and a lot of it is bullshit. A lot of it is empty talk. It's guys talking in a circle at the water cooler, spreading the disease of disinformation or actual misinformation. God, now I sound like DHS. Disinformation, malinformation, misinformation. That's what you and I are on the list for, Jamie.
Oh, dang it. Another list?
But we're only speaking this in the context of being veterans, being in law enforcement. And we know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know, right? So don't beat us up too much over it. But
yeah, and let me add this just to soften a little bit too, Doug, is like most people out there are, you're going to have your sensational guys because they make a lot of money. Every time they're like, hey, buy food, hey, buy water, hey, buy whatever, right? Like, because they're getting kickbacks on all that. So you as listeners need to be able to filter through the money motive of a lot of the sensationalism that's out there. But also, too, I would challenge you to be gracious as well. Like Doug and I need to be gracious as well. A lot of people are operating with best practices, doing their best to try to inform and warn the public. So it may not be.
It's annoying, isn't it, Diane?
Are being sensational in a deceptive or malfeasant sort of way, but they want to do their due diligence and make sure that everybody's kept abreast of what's going on. So again, there's grace in that, and we need to be gracious in that. A lot of people are trying to do their best to because there's a lot of crap going on. And so like, it's like, dude, just get as much information out there as you can, and then we can sift through it later, but at least you can't say you didn't know. And I understand that. And then that's why I say, like, we can be gracious, but that's why I want to add to it periodically, to add to the macro, so that we can filter it rightly. It is one of those things where you kind of just have to vomit and fire hose the geopolitics, the geostrategic stuff, the information, the intel drops going on out there, and like take it all in, and then start don't waste your time getting crazy investigating it. Just listen to people that have already done the work for you. But you start disseminating it, right, and filtering it to where you get a clearer picture. So there's nothing wrong with taking in massive amounts of data so that you can have as clear a picture as possible. Just be aware that all things aren't exactly what they say. And the only thing that I hate is that, although it may be not the intention of a lot of people in the alternative media out there, it ends up being predatory. Their platforms or their information or their intel drops become emotionally predatory, and the majority of listeners are entrusting themselves to the pontificators, and they don't know how to sift through it. That's not a knock on them. It's just everybody has different giftings, different capabilities, different roles, right, in the land of living. They don't know how to disseminate it, so they're trusting you that you already disseminated it rightly for them, right? And so that's why it's so important to come through and kind of like filter out some of the BS, but then affirm the things that are legit. Like, let me affirm some things that are legit. That's a good lead-in. Here's what's legit. World War III is unequivocally imminent. Maybe I should say inevitable, because inevitability and imminency are two different things. Imminency means like today, right? Like this summer. That would be an imminency thing. Inevitability means no matter what, it's going to happen. There's no turning back. But the time frame of it, we're not quite sure of. So I will tell you this: World War III, unequivocally, 100% is assured and inevitable. Why can I say that? Why can I say it's never going to back off? Well, because the Bible affirms it. So that's always going to be my stone wall, the solid rock on which I build my house that I'm going to throw everything against and see what's left after I dash everything against the rock of Jesus Christ, right? And so it is an inevitability. The imminency of it, I will say, from informed speculation, I always get that qualifier. From informed speculation standpoint, I'd say the imminency of it could actually be that soon. As in this time frame right now, right? This early summer until the end of next summer. So we're talking about a year time, 2023, 2024. Generally, you want to do a spring offensive or early summer offensive so that you can gain strategic foothold, so that you can bring in the logistics to support your troops through the cold weather months. You have things with ground and permafrost and fresh water supplies and blah, blah. Like, there's a lot of things that goes into war fighting and war. I was trained in mountain warfare. I was trained in cold weather mountain warfare. I was an assault climber for the Marine Corps. Spent a lot of time doing mountain warfare training stuff. And so anyways, there's a lot that goes into these things. So the inevitability is certain. The imminency is uncertain. I lean towards, in my own perspective, is the imminency is probably that close. Let me tell you why. Here's why. Every single red line has been crossed. Putin has just put out a final word saying, no kidding, F NATO, like coming from a diplomat. China has cut off all hotlines and all crisis lines. Is that a shadow systems or a Roland? Dude, you should send me that. You should give me a gift as your bro. Like, that'd be an awesome gift.
Don't worry about what
Thank you. Thank you, bro, for showing me what you got me for Father's Day. That's awesome.
Hey, every red line has been crossed. Let me tell you what just recently happened in Russia. Putin just recently had a big meeting with all of his allies, and he played a very interesting video for everyone who was there. I'll make sure I add the video in, the way it gives context. And at this meeting, this is what he did. He had his people take Operation Barbarossa. In the film of World War II, Operation Barbarossa, when the German Nazis were trying to invade into Russia, which failed miserably, as every campaign from Napoleon to Hitler has failed miserably, trying to invade Russia during the winter. And he showed then the scorched earth tactic that was used by Russia, or not Russia, by Germany, as they were being repelled by the Russians. They were coming back into the fatherland. He showed the dead, naked bodies. Man, I'm telling you, stuff I can't show on YouTube, stuff that you need to see. If you've never seen war in the context of just how frightening and brutal it is, it's not for everybody, all right? But for some of you who...
That's why Putin calls the Ukrainians Nazis. They were one of the worst collaborators of all with the Nazis.
Context of what we're talking about, the seriousness and lateness of the hour. They showed the videos of the Ukrainians. And here's some history for you, some of you. Who was the largest member country of the Nazi SS battalions?
Ukraine.
Ukraine. Donated the most soldiers, Ukraine. Who was it that helped? I think it was Sri Lanka. Was that the other, like, really, really bad death camp? Because you had Auschwitz, Dachau, I think Sri Lanka. I may be getting that word wrong. But it was ran by the Ukrainians. They had like one or two Nazi officers, but it was all ran by Ukrainians. And it was the Ukrainians who killed the Polish, who ran them down westward, who were murdering the Polish. It was the Ukrainians who were used in a lot of these operations when this whole thing got started, actually, when they started kidnapping people from their homes in Poland and then bringing them out into the ghettos. It was the Ukrainians. And he has video, it's just a highlight reel of Nazis in Ukraine marching with Stefan Bandera, which is like their folk hero, ad Nazi. The videos of infants that were shot in the face. Infants, man, right? Videos of hundreds of bodies just being thrown into open graves. This is what he's playing for world leaders to watch. Welcome to Russia. Here's a highlight reel of who America backs currently. And we do back that. We back Nazis right now.
Wow, that was heavy. Wow. Wow. Wow.
Back Nazis right now.
Oh, we unequivocally back it. I mean, we've backed them all the way since late 1945 and in 1946. I mean, most of your listeners would be familiar with Operation Paperclip and things like that, even Operation High Jump. I mean, I've talked about it in a roundabout way, but my family member was an OSS officer and the chief geologist with Admiral Byrd on Operation High Jump. I know this isn't sensational, this is just reality. I literally found a shoebox of undeveloped 35 millimeter film, didn't know what it was, talked to my family member who found the shoebox, told me about Uncle Arthur being at the seat of the table in the Forbidden City when when Japan signed the surrender papers to China, which no foreigner had ever been there. Picture of him at the table as they're signing it, and then all the pictures of him with Admiral Byrd at America Camp 1 and America Camp 2 on Operation High Jump 1, the initial thing, and all the fleets leaving from New Zealand. Literally, it's all in the. Nobody had seen it. They didn't even know what it was. The family members didn't know. I'm like, this is Operation High Jump. She goes, well, I have this little certificate here. It literally was a certificate of commendation to my uncle, my great uncle, for his conduct on Operation High Jump. And it's there's like, I think there was like 350 of these Antarctic expeditionary medals ever given out. He has one. So anyways, going back to the Nazi question. And so we unequivocally back the Nazis, but let me add this to give the context for what's going on. Okay, I'm just going to kind of bullet point it because it's easier to follow, and then we can discuss it. Last year, China lifted their one-child policy. Does everybody understand what that means? They're anticipating a population loss that they can't even comprehend. And China, communist China, who's been slaughtering babies for the last 80 years as fast and as hard as they can because they can't feed their population because they're worried about a populist uprising against the communist regime, lifted their one-child policy and said, start cranking them out, as many as you can. They know what's coming. Russia, just this week, implemented a thing for a militaristic youth summer program for the youth in Russia to go get training in firearms, combat first aid, and the laying of mines. They're training all their youth. Why? Because they're anticipating a major population reduction, right? A major critical World War III infrastructure. China and Russia both have cut off all diplomacy. Watch diplomacy, not troops. I always say, watch diplomacy. When you start withdrawing ambassadors and calling home U.S. citizens or putting stop loss on your citizens in foreign countries, that means war is imminent. China has already pulled in the U.S. dollar to getting ready to collapse all the debt holdings of the U.S. on the global economy. They've created a backup Swiss system. They've created a backup banking system. They've created a backup internet system. Russia has said that their entire economy is now mobilized for wartime footing. China used the whole pretext of coronavirus to refit and retool all of their factories in Shenzhen and Guangzhou and all these other areas in the Hong Kong area along the ocean, all their deep water ports. They used the cover of COVID to completely restructure all of their manufacturing from our cheap American junk that we love to buy to a wartime economy. If anybody has any historical background, you know that that's the singular thing that made America was a superpower, was our ability to retool our factories, our industrial complex for a wartime economy. Both those nations have done that. Iran has completely joined the fight. Mexico has joined the fight. Cuba has joined the fight. Cuba is now a Chinese forward operating base. Venezuela is a Chinese forward operating base. Mexico is a Chinese forward operating base. And Canada is a major Chinese forward operating base. Thousands, armor brigades on Vancouver Island. Armor brigades. Are you kidding me? And so, like, this thing is going all according to plan as they have foreknown it in real time. Let's not forget the Chinese spy balloon that was allowed to linger over all of our strategic nuclear missile silos. And then let's not forget the Chinese balloon in connection with the comets just coming out of Russia with their strategic targeting list, which just so happens to be all those missile silos in North Dakota and Montana that the Chinese balloon. They have the targeting data on all these things now. Let's take this into context a little bit further. Let's not forget the 14 plus missileers, which most people don't know. Missileer are the U.S. service members that are responsible for manning our strategic nuclear missiles that are in silos, that are terrestrial based. They're not out on ships or aerial based platforms or even some space based platforms that are actually, when you think of a classic missile silo on the ground. Let's not forget that 14 of our missileers were fired under really strange pretext of sexual impropriety, which that's coming from our government. Sexual impropriety? Are you kidding me? Like, dude, the former first lady was the first man. I mean, come on. Like, we're talking about sexual impropriety. So this So the Chinese spy balloon, then the targeting data, then the missileers being fired, then the blah, 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 then Governor Newsom, people, investigative journalists tracking the money that say he's been bought and paid for by China. He has spoken out loud about getting stand-down orders to allow Chinese and troop landings in San Diego and then a little bit further up north on the coast, on the California coast. Then we have Michael Yon and all his amazing investigative journalism down in the Darien Gap in Panama, where the State Department is loading up tens of thousands of Chinese fighting age men on U.S. State Department buses and busing them to the border. And DHS has been given to
any CO that gets told to stand down when China invades, they should go opposite to the rules and do a last stand and take the Chinese on. Wow, I can't believe they're telling them to stand down.
Stand down orders to allow them to come in. Then you have the removal of our oil. Then you have the removal of our weapons. Then you have the depletion of our weapons in combat against archaic weapons of the Russians to make it look like we're doing something. And then let's not forget that all the world leaders currently, including Putin himself, are affiliates of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leadership Group. Let's not forget that. In fact, there is speculation that Putin himself, along with the Klaus Plan, which that's a familiar name that goes back ages, right? That they actually fomented the global youth leadership forum thing, whatever they call it. That Putin was a part of the inception, because his name doesn't appear on any list for this World Economic Forum group of globalist elite. However, he was at the first meeting, I think it was in, I can't remember, 1992 or something. He was at the first meeting in September. In November, they officially launched it, and he was no longer a part. His name wasn't on any list. So there's some speculation that he actually may be one of the founders of this thing that all these world leaders work for. Let's not forget that Trudeau is completely bought and paid for by China. The Biden cartel is bought and paid for by China. The local governments are bought and paid for by China. The corporations are bought and paid for by China. The National Park Service and Bureau of Land Management is bought and paid for by China. And so all of this is going somewhere. It's going to everything that has been prophesied in the scriptures is going to take place. The red horse rides, pieces taken from the earth, men are given over to slaughter one another. And then what follows on is the black horse that rides, and there's global hyperinflation. A day's wages for a loaf of bread, right? Or dinar or denarius, however you read it in your translation. Global hyperinflation, followed by a global pandemic, in which I think it's a quarter of the world's population is killed. By the way, Tedros, the World Health Organization head, Ethiopian dude, bought and paid for by China. People have done he's received tens of millions of dollars from China. He's ahead of the WHO now. He just announced the new pandemic is coming, and we just signed into a global digital ID tied to vaccination records. Announced it last week. So you have the red horse, then the black horse, then the chloros, which is the word chlorophyll in the Greek, or green horse, pestilence, Hades, death rides, right? And then you have the man of perdition coming onto the scene. It's fomented. Everything is perfect. It's terraformed perfect for the man of perdition, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist himself to come onto the scene. So World War III, the Great Reset, and then the next pandemic that they are telling you is assured, because the scriptures have already told you that it's going to go down that way. And Doug, I'll throw this grenade in the room because it's all interconnected. And then this is where the disclosure comes into play. This is where disclosure comes into play, and why all these major revelations have occurred in the last 2 weeks. It is all interconnected. World War III to the global economic collapse, to major pestilence, to great global reduction, to the arrival of these guys who are coming on the scene to help assist humanity in their self-directed evolutionary process to become like gods, to become more than human, to achieve 2.0 transhumanism, terraforming their blah, 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 DNA, mRNA, genetic upgrade. This is where it's all going, and this is why you're seeing this overlay of the disclosure UFO stuff, along with the World War III and the global economic collapse stuff, are all interconnected.
But we haven't even talked about AI yet.
Yeah.
You know, it's,
well, AI is to replace the humans that they know they need to eliminate. About, you know, anywhere from 2 billion. Biblically, we can anticipate 3 to 5 billion being killed within a matter of 18 months to 3 years maximum. 3 to 5 billion people biblically. So when you hear what these globalists are saying about the great population reduction, dude, they're not lying, because the Bible actually affirms that that's exactly what's going to be achieved.
Well, the Satanists don't deny the Bible. They just think they can cheat it.
Yeah, they don't deny the Bible. They just deny the superiority of Christ and the supremacy of Christ in all things. That's all they deny.
Let me talk about this whole UFO disclosure stuff. All right, I'm getting beat up by it. Alberino's getting beat up by it. And I don't care. This is my opinion. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. I don't believe the guys that are coming out, these whistleblowers. Yeah, I know they're risking their life if everything's true, but we have to take the government's word for it. The government, who right now, let me see, claims that it's from Epoch Times. U.S. government has blackmail database on citizens. Pentagon crawls social media for critical speech. Which, by the way, that word "crawl" is not actually crawling. That is actually a phrase for a dragnet process that's used by artificial intelligence to gather data points on you. And everything that you post and everything that you say, you all get lumped into these big groups. NSA has been doing this for years, folks. So now the government has databases on everything that you do. What are they going to do that? Why? What are they going to do with it? Are they going to prosecute us all? You know, is it so hard to say that we can't believe the government, which the FBI themselves said we can't tell you who from Burisma Holdings in Ukraine is our whistleblower because the Biden administration may have him assassinated. That didn't freak out anybody in the mainstream media. Freaked me out that the FBI would straight up come out and say, this guy's going to get Arkansided if we tell you his name. So no, we're not going to tell you his name, which is also a threat and a promise, isn't it, Jamie? And this is another thing. The government says, trust us. We're from the government. We're here to help you. Trust us with our vaccines. Trust us with your kids, which your kids belong to us, according to Joe Biden, right? Trust us with your education, your food, your fuel, your fresh water. Trust us with land management. How about you trust us with your constitutional rights that Biden keeps wanting to destroy? So we can't trust you, the government. I worked for them for 15 years. I don't trust them. Didn't trust them while I worked for them. Did you, Jamie?
No, dude. And dude, this is a huge point because I think people miss it. And I don't know if it was you and I who talked about it or, you know, I was on another program somewhere. But this sowing of distrust for all governments everywhere is actually a part of fomenting for the Great Deception. See, people don't understand it because they don't understand the mystery schools of mystery religion and occultism. What is coming is the Great Deception, not just in other deceptions. See, governments deceive, but they're not a great deception. And for eons, the powers of darkness, this is all, when you hear Trump, by the way, Trump is center stage of all this. He is center stage. He uses Age of Aquarian, Kabbalist, occultic mystery school language in everything he ever utters. Trump is absolutely a part of this. And so within this occultic mystery school teaching about the Aquarian age, you know, or the new order of the ages, we can talk about the controlled demolition, right? Or order out of chaos. You know, there's all these little big words that the truther community likes to use, but they don't really dig into it. They just use them as, again, emotionally predatory sound bites. But the reality is that the powers of darkness have literally, and our world leaders are a part of this, instructed even the oligarchy of the old order of things, the child sacrifice, the satanic ritualistic abuse, the dissociative identity disorder, all their intelligence apparatus, right? Their baby eating, occultic, blood drinking, freak show reality has actually been strategically built up, and you are being allowed to see it, to enrage you, to make you distrust every single aspect, even the failings of the economies, the fiat currencies, the Babylonian money magic, the alchemical processes of our fiat currencies. All these things are literally intentionally being allowed and rolled out, one issue after the next, after the next, after the next, so that you'll distrust everything, because they're going to do a controlled demolition of it and say, and all these wicked elites like the Clintons and the whatever, the Biden families, like all the names you think of as a wicked ruling elite globally, they are all in agreement to be a quote unquote sacrificial lamb to be exposed, poured down, destroyed by the populace, so that the Aquarian age of enlightenment and restoration, again, this self-directed evolutionary process of humanity, can come in for the bigger deception. It's with flatteries that the Antichrist deceives everybody. It's with preaching peace and security that he deceives everybody. The whole world marvels after him because of the wars, because of the wicked elite, because of the human trafficking, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, because of Hollywood, because of the DC, because of the oligarchs, because of the Vatican, because of all the stuff going on around the world, because of the wickedness in China, the human rights violations. It's all been built up by the powers of darkness. This is what deception looks like. This is asymmetric warfare 101. And it is intentionally making you divide and conquer and distrust everything. So when they tear it down, the whole world applauds, and then they bring in the next level that looks like an age of enlightenment, an Aquarian age of humanity to restore all that wickedness. And so this gets in. I know people want to be dismissive about it, but it has weight. And it doesn't matter if you believe it, it matters that they believe it. That's what matters. It doesn't matter if you believe. It matters that this is what they believe, and this is the angle that they're working, is this panspermia, ancient astronaut, golden age of the gods, new age of Atlantis, Atlantean rising out of the ashes to restore the gods of old, to rightly usher in humanity and rule over humanity, because we're going to destroy each other with nuclear weapons. Why is this? Why do I say that this is important? If you pay attention to every mainstream media pontificator on the UFO phenomenon and on this soft disclosure that's going on all the time, mainstream media sources, note this: almost every single time they throw in very subtly a mention about nuclear power and nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. That for some reason they seem to be attracted by this. For some reason, it's almost as if they distrust humans with nuclear capabilities. For some reason, the UFOs are always investigating our nuclear weapons testing ranges, our nuclear power plants and facilities, as if we're a stupid child with a loaded gun. These guys need to come back and protect us from ourselves. By the way, the entire green movement and global warming movement is also a softening for these guys to come help us from destroying ourselves because we're children with a loaded gun, right? And so this is why I say that World War III, which is nuclear weapons exchange, into the global economic reset, global hyperinflation.
That would make a World War III, wouldn't it? If a nuclear bomb went off, that would be the dead set start of the full-on World War III.
Into a pandemic, into massive global depopulation. And then these guys that look at all the attributes of the Antichrist, they show up to help re-enlighten us because we've been like children with a loaded gun. And this is why I say it is all going according to plan unto the...
Phil, if Putin wanted to blow him off the map, he'd march into Kyiv and take over Kyiv. He's got the manpower and the weapons too. He took over them 4 provinces because they had militia in there that were hassling Russian civilians. There was militia in them 4 provinces that Russia took over because the Ukrainian militia was acting like gangsters on the Russian citizens there. That's why Putin went in to protect them.
Great deception. Not another deception. The great
Just my
deception.
opinion.
Well, the Bible and the New Testament It tells us to stay away from folly, stay away from all these foolish conspiracies, because we get so caught up in it. And that deception is great. I'm going to pick on a couple people here for a second, but I'm not personally picking on you. So hold on to your feelings and your hurt feeling reports. You can file them with me afterwards. But I think one of the great deceptions is flat Earth. It's great.
Yes,
unequivocally. Here's why. Here's why. For all you who are going to point to me at every YouTube video and then scripture, I get it. I get it.
A damn music in the background, so annoying.
You're infatuated with it. You're caught up with it. I'm obsessed with Skinwalker Ranch and the paranormal stuff because it's crazy to me that stuff like this even happens and is documented, right? But here's the goal, though. The goal is that you don't believe other things because you're caught in this constant rabbit hole, in this washing machine effect. All right, that's what you're caught in. And there's so many people caught up in this washing machine effect. Once they go down that red-pilled, dark hole path that leads you into the eyes wide shut parties, the Bohemian Grove. And look, I fell down that tumbling path. Jamie fell down that tumbling path. When your eyes open up to all these horrific things going on along the world,
Yep.
The one constant thing that you have to understand is God is who He says He is, and Satan is who He says He is. And those are two constants that you
I'll leave a comment, Diane, when they hang up.
cannot kneel around with. But Satan will always try to disguise himself as a bringer of light, as a bringer of knowledge, a bringer and savior to the humanity. And I think that's what the UFO deception is about.
Yeah. Well, it says masquerading as ministers of righteousness.
Yeah.
In some translations, masquerading, right? So it is a masquerade
how many times
as ministers of righteousness, and that's why I say, like, the great deception does not look like a globalist Luciferian boot on your neck. That's what everybody is looking for. That is not how the great deception manifests. The global government that rolls out is not a boot on your neck. The global government that makes manifest looks like a boot on the neck of the globalist elite, of the Luciferian elite, of the wicked, money-changing, freak show, idiot, blood-drinking, pedophile, blah, 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 you name it. That's how the great deception, it's the boot on the neck of that. And that's why you're willing to give yourself over to it. So all these revelations breaking out about how wicked it is, and all the slow leak about the governments of the world and the corruptions and the monies, and even even the Epstein Island and all that stuff, it's actually because it is a controlled demolition on purpose. And you're going to cheer and you're going to champion and you're actually going to marvel after the beast. You're going to marvel for it, and you're going to be thanking God for it. And it says even the elect would be deceived if it were possible. Even the Christians. Why? Because it's going to look like the millennial reign of Christ. That's why. It will look that good. It will look like it won't look like it. It will be a counterfeit millennial reign of Christ without the justice and judgment of God. That's what the entire end times narrative is. Great chaos, great cataclysm, great wickedness on the earth, days of Noah, days of Lot, all kinds of horrible things, and then it gets destroyed by a counterfeit minister of righteousness who establishes a kingdom of quote-unquote righteousness on the earth. And it's a total deception. And even the Christians, because of Bethel, and because of Hillsong, and because of the Rick Warrens, and because of the Purpose-Driven Lives, and because of the Seeker-Friendly Church, and because of the New Apostolic Reformation, and because of the Southern Baptist.
Guys, I got banished from Hillsong Church. When I got my Wizard of Oz decode, I stupidly took it to Hillsong thinking they'd be interested, because I didn't know what Christianity really was at the time. So, yeah, I've been banished from Hillsong. They sent me a letter and all.
Convention, and because of the social justice, woke progressive Christian warriors of the Gospel Coalition, they are all looking for that answer. And the Antichrist is going to offer it to them all. And they will fall, but many will abandon their faith. Many will abandon the faith. Many will give heed to the doctrines of demons. Many will give heed to the doctrines of demons. It says they will devote themselves to the doctrines of demons. They will not tolerate a sound doctrine. They will be intolerant of truth, but instead they will give themselves over to this deception.
Well,
We're told that.
And I think with a great falling away from the church, you'll have a great massing of the new faith.
Yes, a super church is going to rise up.
I'll pick on my next group of people. That's Catholics. That's your Vatican.
Yeah.
Who are looking for the aliens, right? You can't. There's no other religious entity out there in the world. Whenever you see the false prophet, and you can say, oh yeah, that's definitely the Lutherans. That's definitely the Methodists. Got to be them Baptist preachers dancing with rattlesnakes in Tennessee. No one has made themselves king on earth and said, I am the vicar of God, but one religion. And that man is a king. The Pope is a king. And he is one of the kings of this earth. And I don't trust it. I don't like it. I know people don't like it when I say it. I don't care. It is to me, I think it's a dangerous movement that has encapsulated the minds of people because of dogmatic practices. And it makes you feel good. You play with your rosary. You do 20 different Hail Fathers and Marys, and throwing the football all the way down the field. I get it. We are fleshly people. We are dealing with the law of sin, and for that we go to these dogmatic practices because we think maybe this is the best way to approach God. When honestly, the best way to approach God is to hit your knees, get in your prayer closet, and be quiet and just praise Him, right? But that's not what we're taught. Instead, you'll have this super church entity that will be like the Catholic Church. I believe it will be like the Catholic Church. It could be the Mormon Church. I mean, they believe in aliens. It could be something of this line, or when these entities come down from the sky or up from underneath the ground, and I don't care where they come from, but when they show up, they'll say that they are the ministers of light, that they're angels. They'll have someone who is, I've heard this before, and I actually give credence to this. They'll have people who will come out and say, Jesus was one of us.
Yes, that's exact. I mean, when you look at the mystery schools and the cultists, that's what they already say. Mm-hmm. And again, going back, when you look at Mormonism is hook, line, and sinker. Anybody who says Mormons are Christians, I'm sorry, you don't understand faith. In fact, I did a church plant in Nauvoo, Illinois, which is where Joseph Smith was martyred. It's their most significant temple that they have to Hajj to or pilgrimage to, whatever word you want to use, is Nauvoo, Illinois. I was there every year for their pageant. That temple has the angel Moriah on the top, which is a fallen angel, and upside down pentagrams for every single window on that temple. Mormons believe that Jesus and Lucifer are brothers. You have to take the hand of Lucifer through the curtain to come into Mormonism. And Mormons believe that God and Jesus are not one and the same, that Jesus is a lesser created being, so they deny Christ outright. I don't care what the Mormon tells you. They are systematically trained in Mormonism apologetics to work around any Christian rebuttal that they have. And they actually believe in panspermia and their space brothers and their ability to populate their own planet one day. They actually believe that. That's why Mormons do death baptisms and all these genealogical baptisms, all these genealogy things. Most of them were started by Mormons. Bill Gates is a Mormon, in case you didn't understand.
I didn't know that.
But a significant number of the ruling elite are Mormons, and most people don't know it. The majority of our major corporations are run by Mormons, and most people don't know it. And Mormons actually, I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe that they currently now own more property globally than the Catholic Church. You can't even conceive of what that means. And Mormons, like the Catholic Church of old, they establish and erect a temple on every piece of ground that they can as a military conquest to claim it for Mormonism, which is Luciferianism. They all worship Lucifer. Mormonism.
I didn't know Bill Gates was a Mormon. If you listen to that William Snowbellin, he does a big expose on the Mormons, and he said the higher Mormons, they're all warlocks, just as bad as the 30. Actually, they are. 33rd degree Masons. So Bill Gates is one of them. Man, he's going to implement that starvation program because he's bought up all the land in, all the farming land in America. Well, guys, it's really ramping up now.
Is 33-degree Freemasonry package. Every vestige, every little idolatry, every little iconography is only Freemasonic. Go look up Joseph Smith. Go look up all these guys, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so you have the Catholic Church that's preaching panspermia. You have the Mormon Church preaching panspermia. And then you have the Apostate Christian Church, which whether or not they are able to articulate it, they actually proclaim the same thing. That's preterism and that's dominionism. That's dominion theology and preterism theology of Bethel and Hillsong, which if you are in an American evangelical church, you are singing Bethel and Hillsong songs. They have infiltrated everything through worship, the emotionally predatory nature of music. What was Lucifer in charge of in the heaven? Oh, he was in charge of music. That's right. And they're doing the grave soaking, they're doing necromancy, they're doing tarot card reading in Redding, California, in their mega churches. They are terraforming the earth with the same ideology as the Mormons and as the Catholics. So, by the way, any Mormons or Catholics that listen to this, don't get your panties in a bunch. It's the spirit of the age. It's not you or them. It's everybody. The New Agers, the occultists, the ones who worship Maitreya, the ones who worship Gaia, the ones who worship this, the ones who they're all looking actively and have had the predictive programming and the seeds sown into their flesh for the same eager expectation and anticipation of the new eon of the ages. And that is exactly what the Antichrist is going to offer them. Exactly what the Antichrist is going to offer them. And in fact, the Truther movement, some whose names I won't use, that are mega personalities in the alternative media truther movement, when I hear them speak, because I'm well studied in these things, they are sowing and using the same exact language as all those other occultic things.
And I know who you're
They are actually tearing down the news system because the humanity is going to rise again, and we're going to have these new parallel economies and these new things, and it's going to be this new utopia because all the wicked global elite are going to be torn down. And I'm like, yeah, they are, dude. That's the deception. That is the deception. The only time when it's said and done is when you see the rider on the white horse, whose name is Faithful and True, who rides out in justice and judges and justice who make war. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, emblazoned on his thigh, fire from his eyes, and he opens his mouth and speaks, and it's done. That's the only imagery. That's the only thing that you can trust as the actual defeat of all the wickedness. It's not going. And man, when I talk about great deception, I can't even I don't even know how to start connecting the dots because people don't have the paradigm for it. So let me come full circle because I know we're getting long on the show here. I'm looking at the clock. World War III is inevitable and most likely imminent. Global economic collapse, reset, global hyperinflation, digital ID, blockchain technology with the new cryptocurrency, central bank currency is absolutely imminent. It is inevitable and imminent. Global pandemic, where as there's actually bodies in the streets, it is absolutely inevitable and imminent. And all of it leads to the great deception. So it's all interconnected.
When the craft come down from the sky, Jamie, it will be 24/7 news coverage. And I've said this since I started doing this podcast here, that I believe that World War III will happen in 2024, 2025 timeframe, and that most likely in 2024, we're going to have the actual beginnings of civil war. Everyone says we're in civil war now. No, we're not.
No, we're not.
For
This is not civil war.
This is media pundits
is civil discord.
Yeah, no, this is the beginnings of a revolution. A civil war is something that's way different, man. Way different. So I think we have this possibility of this happening. I'm not going to say it's happening. I'm saying we have this possibility of it happening. And then you have Stephen Greer. I want to show you this, who comes out with all the whistleblowers, all the UFO stuff. How do you vet any of the information? Okay, you got to trust him and all the crazy stuff that he says. And don't forget, he's a New Ager. He believes that there are saviors, and he believes that there's a global cabal that's created all the craft and they're doing all the bad stuff, and the real aliens are the good guys, and we need to have
there you go.
a mediator, that there should be a global mediator that on behalf of all people of Earth, so there's New World Order right there, on behalf of all people of Earth, someone should be there to liaison with them. Who's the perfect person to liaison with the aliens, the guys who come and kidnap us, and they do all the weird stuff to you on the craft? Who's gonna be the guy that volunteers for that, right? And which one of the 70 species are we talking about? How do you vet any of this information? This is what makes me upset. You can't vet it. You haven't shown me actual videos of aliens. Even that Las Vegas thing, I know I'm getting 1,000 different videos from people. You can't see anything, but I know CGI. I know how AI can be used. I know how Hollywood special effects guys can do stuff. Things can be faked. Things can be faked. Not only that, but white papers from the government can be created that says, oh, we found a craft in 1945. Well, says who? Says me, because I found.
Good night, Phil. God bless, mate.
Someone I can't disclose gave it to me. Well, how convenient is that for our truth? We'll just take your word for it. We'll take your word for it and everything that you say. I'm not buying it. I'm going to remain a skeptic, and I'm not saying that there's not aliens and demons and craft and all this stuff. Have fun with it, man. All right? If 556 and Flamethrower can't take care of it, Doug's going to figure out another way. But I'm not going to be thrown into a panic. And I'm following it on Twitter. God help me, I'm on Twitter again. I'm following it on Twitter. Every other thing, I'm trying to find geopolitics. Every other thing is about UFOs. And I've been saying it's going to be every day is UFOs.
Yeah, most Pollyanna Christians don't realize how significant the narrative is. And I've heard guys say, I can't listen to you because I've heard you mention UFOs or aliens. I'm like, then you ain't paying attention.
Okay,
because you, especially as a legitimate born-again Christian by the blood of Christ Jesus, redeemed by his completed work and his righteousness alone, clothed in Christ, right? You absolutely ought to be highly informed of these, because the whole world is based around these concepts right now. And for you to stick your head in the sand because you don't want to look like an idiot talking about it, you look like an idiot because you're unwilling to talk about it. And actually, you're going to leave people dead in their transgressions because they're going to be deceived. So you ought to do your due diligence and be able to give an answer, especially to a reprobate, crooked, and perverse, darkening generation that is longing for the truth. Why do you think they're all digging in it? They're looking for the truth. You ought to hold it out for them. It's Jesus Christ. That's right. He is the way, the truth, and the life, right? Like, you ought to be able to hold that out at a moment's notice. But yeah, so let me just add this, because I'm going to do, this is a total tangent, but I want to bring it full circle because I was thinking about it as you're talking, because I don't want people to misinterpret things that we've said. If you stayed with this long, this one point that I started out with is the troop mobilizations inside the continental United States. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that it's not happening. What I am saying is that some of the imagery and some of the things that are going on are hyperbolic and sensationalized, and you need to dismiss some of it.
FTX that happens every summer.
Some of it is legitimate. It is a concern. You do need to pay attention. You need to prepare accordingly. You do need to plan accordingly, because everything is going to plan accordingly. I was only one. I don't think I did a good job of communicating that. We need to dismiss some of it, but you also need to understand that we are at that zenith right now. We are at that zenith. There are things moving. There are gag orders being given out to the mainstream media. There are troop movements and troop mobilizations that are occurring. I had my 21-year-old nephew got a draft paper in the mail the other day. He was super confused by it. China's doing their children thing. Russia's doing their children thing. The U.S. is trying to do their children thing, or they can't recruit anybody because of all the transgenderism. So now they're trying to give legal citizenship status if you join the military. Everybody's getting ready for this thing. So there are authentic mobilizations going on inside the United States for what comes next. That is a major kinetic war with 3 mega powers and their proxies: Russia, China, Iran, and all their proxies in Central and South America and elsewhere, coming against the U.S. at the same time. I don't know if you saw Dubai lit up their tower, largest tower in the world, with the Russian flag. Saudi Arabia pivoted towards Russia. Cuba pivoted towards Russia. Mexico's pivoted towards Russia. Everybody's pivoting and picking their sides because this thing's imminent. The only thing I was communicating is that not all of it is related to this World War III buildup. Be careful of the sensationalism that's out there. Talk to guys that have the eyes to discern what the movements that are going on the roads, because we'll tell you what to get your pucker factor up and what to not be so concerned about, right? So anyways, I just wanted to add that caveat. I know that I distracted from the UFO conversation.
Between the Psalm 83 wars and the hooks being put back into Gog and, you know, and Magog, it's very troubling what's going on. I hear very literal from pastors right now. You know, I hope that everyone out there, you got your preps for. I hope you're spiritually ready. I hope you're spiritually ready, because war is something that no one is ever ready for. No government is ever ready for war, and I think we are. I think we are going to war. Like I said, I don't think we're going to war now. I don't think we're going to war in the next 6 months, because unless things quickly start to collapse in this country and spark over in Ukraine and Russia, which I will say they're getting that way, because now the Ukrainians are passing into Russian territory with our equipment and attacking Russian villages. They're attacking Russian military. That's not good. Okay, so
very good points, isn't it, Chris? This isn't left mainstream media. This is the good stuff. These are the channels that tell the truth, and they're always Christian orientated.
We definitely have Red Dawn becoming more than just a really cool 80s film. It's looking like it may be very real here soon, and nobody is ready for it, not to the extent that we think. Let's play this clip from Stephen Greer. It's like 3 minutes long, and then I want you to tell me what you think of afterwards. And I'm sorry, but I'm gonna play it, because this guy and these guys are talking about a narrative that the government is not refuting, and they're saying that everyone in the world is involved with this, and this is part of the Great Deception. And if you want to be studious about this, you need to understand which deception we're talking about.
Yeah, and just as a qualifier, I'll speak to it for brevity's sake, because I know, like I said, that our show's going a little long, and I know people's attention span. They won't stay with us all the way to the end. They'll just tune out. So we'll address it with brevity in mind. So yeah, man, hit it.
Take on a group who have technologies 1,000 years beyond what I know we have, which is the best thing I can deploy is a B-2 stealth bomber. So this is a very serious issue strategically. How do you approach this? Now, the constitutional government of the United States has the rule of law, and I think if it's disclosed properly, the support of the populace and the people and the rank and file. And I want to point out, virtually all the Disclosure Project witnesses, except some of these few that are very much at the top, were just obeying orders. They were at a site, they were Delta Force or a Navy SEAL or what have you. They didn't know that the management of it had escaped constitutional control. And I didn't know that until 1993. And that was, of course, my coming of age when I realized, my God, the president, the director of the CIA are being denied access, and then multiple senators and congressmen that I met with privately. So I think that what we want to do is resolve this in a peaceful, legal fashion. And we do not want to just go straight to, DEFCON 1, right? We don't want to go to that. So I think we need to do that in the next 6 months. However, the information I have, I don't want to go further than that, is that a clock has been placed on this. It must be resolved within this year, early next year. And then things are going to deteriorate significantly.
6 months, and then things will deteriorate significantly. All right.
Yeah.
What the hell's he talking about?
Well, and I think that goes into what they're fomenting, which is a terraforming of the earth with a shared global collective consciousness rooted in fear. So the coronavirus was the initial softening blow to a tearing of the veil. I'm absolutely convinced of that. This is mega end times prophecy, biblical narrative based reality, what's going on right now. And so with that, you have this fear collective consciousness. So I have immediate empathy with somebody in Malaysia. I don't, because I didn't buy into it, but most people, right? Like somebody in Malaysia, somebody in Indonesia, somebody in Micronesia, somebody in Oceania, so somebody in the Balkans. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're an Inuit, you know, or if you're an Argentinian. Like I would have instantaneous empathy of a shared collective consciousness with you because of the traumatic experience, the Luciferian traumatic initiation, right? Satanic ritualistic abuse on a global scale from coronavirus. The next thing that comes with the World War III, the economic collapse, and then the rollout of disclosure and the exposure of these things is the nail in the coffin. You will have such a ubiquitous shared collective experience with radical fear response. Remember, it says men's hearts will fail them for fear. Their hearts will physiologically die. They will kill them. People can actually be killed physiologically from a fear response. That's how hardcore the adrenal, the epinephrine, the hormone dump, the cardioelectrical activity within the heart, and your SA node and your AP node and stuff like that, that go in your heart, it can actually kill you from fear. It says that men's hearts will fail them for fear of what they see coming on the earth. That degree of physiological shared response collectively and globally, like this guy's saying, within a 6 months time frame, is the galvanizing factor for the man of perdition who teaches peace and security to come on scene. I think he's absolutely telling us exactly what's going to happen. Everybody's telling us what's going to happen. Nobody's paying attention. They're still caught up on flat earth. Seriously, flat earthers, seriously, just stop. Anybody who's worked in radar, anybody who's worked in the military, anybody who's worked on a ship, anybody who's operated any type of communications devices.
And not just that, guys, with flat earth, what would be the motive to create a globe conspiracy? What's the point of doing that? So there is no flat earth, because what's the point of making up a globe conspiracy? It's not a salvation issue. So these flat earthers, they're not really thinking this through.
Like, flat earth is dispelled in an instant. I don't care about your 6 verses that you throw me every time. It's like, dude, get off of it. You're so hung up on that, you're going to be so easily deceived by everything else that's coming down the pipeline. And it is coming down the pipeline. So that's what I think that we're speaking to in this reality.
Well, it's definitely not going away. And more is going to come out every day about it. You know, I would like to end today, if you could, Jamie, if you could lead us out in a prayer, because we need prayer in our life more than we probably need a lot of this fanatical news. And I want to just send out a warning to everyone to not be caught up in the madness when it starts. It hasn't started yet. But it hasn't started yet, but don't get caught up.
Well, and that's all I've been preaching to, you know, is pastoring this church out here, and people can go through the sermon series on my YouTube channel, Jamie Walden, and stuff we've been talking about for months, and going through this idea of matters of the heart. And the whole thing is to strengthen the heart of God's people to know their identity in Christ alone. That's my only burden, because of the reality of what I'm in tune to globally, that we must know our God. Daniel 11:32 says that those who know their God shall go forth and do daring feats of valor. It says there are those who will overcome all these things by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they do not love their life so much as they're afraid to lose it, right? We have Daniel 12 speaks to that, the time of the likes of which never has been and never will be again, that those who are wise in the Lord will turn many back to righteousness, and they'll shine like bright shining stars in the vast expanse of the universe, from everlasting to everlasting. We're told in Psalm 112 that we are not to be among those who fear bad news in Christ. Blessed are those who fear the Lord. See, you fear the Lord more than any of these other things, you're going to be good to go. You fear the Lord, you're going to have wisdom. You fear the Lord, you're going to hate wickedness, because the fear of the Lord is a hate wickedness. You fear the Lord, he's going to reveal to you the depths of the mystery of his covenant, right? He's going to take you deep into the word. He's going to take you deep into your identity in Christ Jesus when you fear the Lord. You fear the Lord, your children are mighty in the land. You fear the Lord, you have a strong tower. You fear the Lord, you will not be overcome by these things. When you dwell, when you hide and you abide in the shelter of the Most High, there is a supernatural protection by God, by the power of Christ Jesus in you, over you, and out through you. Not even just a protection, but actually an equipping to turn many people back to glory, to turn the flat earthers back to the authentic gospel instead of all these distractions of all their Torah observant flat earth,
And Chris, with this flat earth, they say there's an ice ring around the flat earth. I see the North Pole, I see the South Pole, I don't see the East and West Pole. In fact, I'm pretty sure the East Pole is where the equator is. And how come with all our technology, no one's taken a photo of over this ice wall? It's just bizarre crap.
Where they completely deny the sufficiency of Christ, and they take back on a yoke of slavery and a yoke of bondage that he's so shattered. I mean, like to the destruction of their desire for the rebuilding of the third temple and the re-implementation of animal sacrifices for their sins, because apparently the blood of Christ wasn't sufficient enough for them, right? Like we have to have an identity in Christ alone. And these are the things that I've been speaking to for months to the church, and like exposing our hearts, and then repenting where we need to repent, being solidified in Christ where we need to be solidified, and raising up in radiancy, because that's what Christ died to make his church and to make his people a radiant church, spotless, blameless, without wrinkle. That's what he died for. So yeah, man, that is what it's all about, is like literally an identity in Christ alone. Like allow the Lord to deconstruct you, allow the Lord to crush you, allow the Lord to reduce you, allow the Lord to literally beat the hell out of you, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts richly by the grace and by the mercy of God alone. That's what it's all centered on. So yeah, man, couldn't agree more. I'm not of those who fear bad news. It says we are not shaken, Psalm 112. We're not easily shaken. Our hearts are steadfast. We have no fear. Our hearts are secure. We do not fear any of these things. In fact, the spirit God's given us in Christ Jesus is not a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. A sound mind. That word in the Greek is sophreno. He's given you a spirit not of fear, but of power, of his love, and of a sophreno, which is a mind that has been delivered, salvaged, and rescued from absurd, highly emotional and illogical thoughts. Yep. That's 100%. What the word sophreno translates to in the Greek. That's the mind he's given us. So any mind outside of that is not the mind of Christ. It's the mind of the world. It's the mind of this temporal world. It's the mind of the powers of darkness whispering in the ear, poking at you, nagging you, and prodding you, right? It's the mind that the global elite want you to have. It's the mind of this age. But the mind of Christ that we have in Christ Jesus is sophreno, rescued, salvaged, and delivered from absurd and highly illogical or emotional thoughts. We have a sound mind in Christ Jesus and not one of fear. Because we are so jealous for God, we're so jealous for his glory, that we will not give anything else our fear, even death itself, or governments, or money, or our bank accounts, or the rejection of the world around us, or the mocking and the scoffing. We don't fear any of it because we're so jealous for God. We only will give our fear to God alone. We protect the fear. We're jealous for our fear. We're zealous for our fear, and we give it to the only one who's worthy of it. Fear the Lord alone. Do not give it to anything else that this world has to throw at you. That's all I got. Let's pray,
Absolutely. Man. Hey, real quick before we do the prayer, can you let people know where they can find your information at your website and the conference coming up?
Yeah, they can get a hold of me at omegadynamics.org. So that's omegadynamics.org. And obviously, Omega Dynamics are the powerful and effectual actions of the redeemed of the Lord at the end of all things, are Omega Dynamics. Also, CalicoBuffaloBasecamp.com. You can get a hold of me there. And if you want to break away from all these reprobate companies and all that stuff like that, and stick it to them with your money and help support this ministry, and Doug in the end as well too, is go to ourfreedombeginsnow.com and start shopping away from all these wicked reprobate companies. So you can go to ourfreedombeginsnow.com, and in the drop down menu you can select Jamie Walden. And listen, flat earthers, do not send me an email. I automatically delete them. The most militant thing ever is the Torah observant crowd and this flat earther crowd. And for all you Torah observants say that, oh, you don't believe the commands of Jesus Christ, then you're denying. I'm like, no, you literally have denied Christ Jesus. Read Galatians, read Hebrews, read Romans, read every single epistle, read the Gospels, read all the red letter words of Jesus Christ. It is insane how quick this firestorm, this conflagration of apostasy is sweeping through the claimants of Christianity right now. And most of it is coming through the truther movement. Most of the apostasy of Christians is coming not from the unbelieving world, it's coming through the truther movement. So don't send me, go ahead, send them to me. I just delete them, and you can speak your word curses over me, and you can manifest all your vile hatred, rage, anger, lack of the fruits of the Spirit that you ever can, because that's every email I've ever gotten from a flat earther or from a Torah observant person. So I make no apologies for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the sufficiency of an identity in Christ alone, not an identity in your dates and times and your feast days and what you eat and what you don't eat, because the word speaks to that spirit ad nauseum. It is the singular spirit that every apostle had to battle as they advanced the gospel with the Judaizers, was the Torah observant type of crowd, and the Jews who killed Jesus. And they will be the ones that actually put Christians to death and believe they're doing God's work. They'll be the ones.
Yeah, but it doesn't look like a flat earth. It looks like a round marble.
That come under the Antichrist, because he's going to rebuild the temple. He's going to re-implement the animal sacrifice. He's going to implement the Noahide laws. And all these people are so ripe for deception, they can't even comprehend it. But yet they believe they're doing God's work by slaughtering the saints in the spirit and with their language because of their Torah observance and their flat earth stuff. It's nuts, dude. Just nuts, the deception.
And
Okay.
It's only going to get worse. Come on, let's pray.
Let's pray. So, Lord, we do thank you and praise you that your loving kindness is what sustains us, God. I think of the Israelites in the days of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20 as you know, they looked around them, and Jehoshaphat proclaims, like, this army is too vast, it's too great, God. We don't know what to do. And yet the simplicity of his prayer was, we don't know what to do, Lord, but our eyes are on you. And God, in your faith and in your grace and your loving kindness towards your people, you spoke over him, Lord, in tenderness. And you told him to put on their armor and to march out to battle, worshiping you and you alone, and that you would rout the enemies on their behalf. God, the things that this world has to throw at us, the things that the governments and the technologies and the worlds and the deceptions, the failings of the church, the apostasy, the spirit of the age of just such an abusive, arrogant, prideful, haughty, self-destructive spirit of this age, God, you have told us that we can march out against it. It is too vast for us. What can we do against it, Lord? That you command us to just go out praising you for your sufficiency, and that your loving kindness endures forever. Your loving kindness endures forever. You've proved it by the lengths to which you were willing to go with your son, Christ Jesus, that while we were your enemies, and while we were dead in our trespasses, and while we were far from you, you pursued us, God, unrelentingly pursued our hearts through your son, Jesus, that whoever would believe in him might have a hope that will last, an inheritance kept in heaven for us, spotless, unspoiled, and fading. You've promised us, God, in 1 Peter, that you will guard us to our reward by your power. Praise be to you, God. It's not dependent on our power. Praise be to you, God. It's not dependent on our faithfulness. We'll fail you 10 times out of 10, but you told us your faithfulness is our shield and our rampart. I thank you for your faithfulness to us, God, when we fall short. I praise you, Lord, for the spirit that you've given us through your son, Jesus. And I praise you, Lord, that death has lost its sting and it's been swallowed up. And the powers of darkness are a disarmed and vanquished foe in the power of the resurrection of you, Christ Jesus. We put our hope in that, God. Renew our minds, make our minds strong, God. Redeem all that the enemy has taken through all these false movements, through all these deceptions, God, through all these destructions of the glory of your Son, through the core-absorbing stuff, through the NAR stuff, through the flat earth stuff, God. So much has just torn at the sufficiency of your Son and reduced the power and the glory of your Son, Jesus Christ, who you said you made everything through to and to glorify your name through your Son. And I know, Lord, that nothing is going to separate us from your love that you made that has been made known in your Son, Jesus Christ. Not even fallen angels, nor darkness, nor light, nor demons, nor nothing, and all of creation is going to separate us from your love in Jesus. I just pray, God, that we would be humble enough to come into it, to rest in it, to hide in it, and to dwell in it, God, in the shelter of the Most High. Thank you for this time and this opportunity, God, and for Doug and his willingness to put himself out there, God, and take the heap and abuse of the spirit of this age. And I thank you for sustaining us and
I'll tell you what, he does a great prayer. I really like his prayer.
giving us warning, God, so that we can strengthen our hearts in you. And that's why you give us these warnings, God. It's not for fear's sake, but it's so we can do business with you. We can shed off the things of this world. We can put to death our flesh and the things that hinder your spirit, and we can actually be strong for the day of battle. And I pray all these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay, guys, see you tomorrow.
Comet's protein bars are the
Paul, we're finding fossils